Good evening. Is the volume comfortable? Tonight we tour a medieval town where the most dramatic event is something as interesting as bread rising. Before the sun climbs fully above the rooftops, the town square is already awake. Its cobbles gleam with night mist, thin smoke curls from early fires. Somewhere a church bell tolls prime, its soft echo rolling over tile and timber. In the hush between night and bustle, you can feel the bones of a medieval town, the web of streets drawing toward this open heart, where trade, talk, and justice meet. The square is wide but uneven, edged by tall timber-framed houses whose upper stories lean forward as though curious. Beneath their eaves, stalls and carts stand ready. Some merchants arrived in dark, bakers bearing warm loaves, the scent already drifting. Butchers sharpening knives with slow rasp, a cheesemonger setting wheels of pale and gold on plank table. Cloth sellers unroll bolts dyed woad blue or madder red, their colours catching first light. Watermen clatter in with buckets from the town well. Washerwomen spread damp linen to air on ropes strung between posts. A boy scatters straw to soften the ground for livestock. Pigs squeal in pens near Butchery Corner. Geese mutter in wicker cages. An old woman arranges herbs, sage, thyme, fennel, each bundle tied with twine and damp to keep fresh. The air smells of yeast, smoke, wet stone, and a faint thread of spice. Guild apprentices appear soon after dawn, grey-cloaked and yawning. A tanner's lad shoulders heavy hides. The smith's boy rattles a barrow of nails and ironware. From narrow alleys come coopers with barrels, potters with glazed jugs, chandlers balancing trays of tallow dips. Friends and rivals trade nods and jests. Everyone knows where his master's pitch is laid. On one side of the square stands the market cross, or a simple stone pillar, sign that trade here is lawful and blessed. Some towns add a covered market hall where measures are checked and oaths sworn. Close by rises the town hall or Guildhall, stout in stone or timber, its bell ready to summon council or warn of fire. Across the way the church lifts tower or spire, its bells measuring the morning hours. Together these buildings frame the market's life. By mid-morning carts rumble in from the countryside. Farmers bring eggs, butter packed in cool moss, root vegetables, woven baskets. Millers trundle sacks of flour. Foresters stack faggots of firewood. Some peasants carry geese or rabbits alive, legs bound. They pay toll at the gate or to the market officer, who measures and stamps with the town seal. Each hopes for a good price before competition crowds in. Bargaining begins early and lasts all day. Housewives pinch cabbages and judge cheese by heft. Merchants argue over bolt lengths. Children clutch coins for gingerbread. Bells mark the hours. Prices rise and fall with the sun. Shouts tangle with laughter. Pigs squeal and the creak of axles. Dogs scavenge dropped scraps. Cats stalk pigeons near the grain. Smells grow rich as cooking starts. Pie sellers set charcoal braziers, hissing hot meat and onion drift on the air. Honey cakes and spiced nuts lure the young. Fishmongers cry their catch, stalls wet and glistening. Salt tang mixes with river damp. Alewives arrive with small casks, ladling cups for thirsty market-goers. Along the edges craftsmen work in view of all. Cobblers fit shoes, tailors knit hems, scribes write letters for the illiterate. The square is its only shop but workshop, a place where things are made under sky. Minstrels fiddle for coins, a juggler gathers a laughing ring. Order matters. Town beadles and sergeants patrol with staves, keeping lanes clear and checking measures of bread and ale. The assize protects buyers, cheating bakers risk the stocks. Scuffles spark when prices are disputed, or fingers grow light, the watch steps in briskly. Stocks or pillory stand near the cross as reminder, sometimes already occupied by a petty thief. faith threads through commerce, priests stroll among stalls with blessings, friars ask alms. At certain hours the bells hush the chatter as many cross themselves and murmur prayer. On feast days, the square holds pageants as well as merchants, banners, relics, and a blessing for town and trade alike. Season sets the rhythm. Spring markets burst with greens, lambs, early shipments of cloth. Summer swells with grain, fruit, and the tramp of pilgrims. Autumn is richest with harvest goods and long fairs. Winter grows quieter, then quickens near Christmas with candles, fish, dried fruits, and gifts. Weather colours the day. Muddy tangle in rain, cheerful dust in sun, sudden hush when snow begins to fall. Behind the stalls lie webs of power. Guilds decide who may sell and at what price. Apprentices angle for advancement. Merchants guard the recipes of dye and the maps of routes. Town council levies taxes. Lord or bishop claims a share. Deals struck over ale benches shape the next season's market and sometimes the town's politics. Yet for ordinary folk, the square is the heartbeat of social life. Friends meet, lovers glimpse each other across apples, children chase chickens, gossip runs faster than goods. Who wed, who quarrelled, which harvest failed, what rumour rides from court or war. Here news outruns messengers, carried in every bargain. By late afternoon the trade ebbs. Farmers count coins and turn homeward, empty baskets swinging. Craftsmen pack tools, sweepers shovel scraps for pigs. Shadows lengthen across the cobbles, bell towers gild with sunset. A final loaf or pie goes to a latecomer, a last mug of ale is drained. Evening brings a gentler square. Stalls close, but the place does not sleep. Young folk linger with songs and games, children kick rag balls, elders sit and talk. Watchmen light lanterns and pace the lanes. Dogs nose along, hopeful for bones. In the hall, windows glow for counsel. Sometimes a preacher mounts the cross to address the night. As dark deepens, shutters draw small lights warm behind them. The busy heart grows quiet save for the watch's steps and the bell marking curfew. Tomorrow it will wake again just as lively, tying farm to city, merchant to peasant, news to ear, and bread to hungry hand. So when you picture medieval towns, imagine first this square at dawn, mist lifting, stalls rising, smells and cries weaving a living web of trade and talk. This is the soul of civic life, humble, noisy, full of hope, where centuries of buying, selling, and meeting began each day. Step away from the noisy square and follow a narrow lane of timbered fronts and smoky workshops. At its end rises a sterner shape, the Guildhall. Behind carved doors and tall-leaded windows, the lifeblood of the town is counted, guarded, and celebrated. For a craftsman or merchant, this is no mere building. It is the house of honour and shared fate. Its look varies by wealth, but always it wears quiet authority. In rich cities it stands in stone, archways cut with shields that bear the tools of the trade, a shoemaker's knife, a weaver's shuttle, hammer and tongs. Elsewhere it is grand timber, jet-black beams and white panels, a wide porch where notices are nailed and bargains struck in its shade. From the eaves a banner snaps, a wheel, a key, a gilded shuttle, the emblem of the brotherhood within. Step inside and breathe polish, wool grease, beeswax, and old smoke. The hall is long and high. Oak rafters loom dark as a forest nave. Benches line the walls. On a raised dais sits the great chair of the master. Light falls in pale bars from high windows, catching dust like gold. Painted boards and stitched banners recount the craft's history. Near the dais squats a carved chest. Within lie charters, accounts, and the heavy seal that validates ore. This room is many rooms at once, a court, a school, a bank, a feast hall. Here apprentices are sworn, masters are proved, quarrels judged, prices set, measures kept honest, the ell for cloth, the stone for weight, the stamped cup for ale. To cheat these marks is to risk fine, shame, even expulsion. On ordinary mornings, clerks bend over tables' quills whispering, journeymen come to pay dues, masters bring petitions for new rules or redress. Talk hums of dye and grain, of unsafe roads and clever improvements, a loom that saves a hand, a clasp that never fails. Decisions taken here ripple outward through every stall and shop. Binding an apprentice is a rite of belonging. The child, often 12, sometimes younger, sometimes a girl in trades that allow kneels before the dais. A small fee changes hands, oaths are spoken. To work diligently, keep the craft's secrets, honour the guild's peace. The master lays blessed tools upon small palms, knife, shuttle, awl, plane, and the clerk inks the name into a thick register. From that moment, a new life begins. Years later, pride returns to this floor. A journeyman lays down a masterpiece, a chest joined without gap, a shoe stitched without a pucker, cloth even from selvage to selvage, a lock cunning as a puzzle. Elders measure and tap, nodding or frowning, murmuring to one another. If the work holds true, a seal is pressed to the writ, Vermaster. Doors open. A shop can be hung with sign. An apprentice can be taken in turn. Discipline is as present as honour. The baker who lightens loaves, the fuller who fouls the stream, the smith who salts his iron with lies, all answer here. Fines bite, public apology stings. In worst cases the guild closes its ranks and bars the offender out. Reputation binds members together. A stain on one splashes many. Feasting remakes the room. Boards are set on trestles, candles lifted in iron crowns. Bread, cheese, roasted meats, pies fragrant with spice. Ale and wine tapped from butt and tuns. Under dark rafters rise songs of the craft. Slow hymns on the patron's day, rollicking catches after. On saints' feasts a procession winds through the streets. Banners high, tools polished, children bright in the guild colours. Then back here for a meal, where counsel flows with drink and marriages, apprenticeships and alliances are quietly sealed. Charity has its chest too. Coins put aside for widows, the sick, the burial of the poor. When fire takes a roof, hands and timber are sent. When a member is wrongfully held, a lawyer's fee or bail is paid. Orphans of masters find places at others' benches. Old men eat from the brotherhood's loaf. In this way, craft becomes family, beyond blood. The Guildhall's voice reaches beyond its door. Delegations climb the town hall steps to argue tolls, market rights, or road repairs. Wealthy guilds lend to bishops and princes. Some muster men when the walls are threatened. A banner at the head of a company can sway a vote or steady a wavering council. Beneath humble tools lies quiet might. Learning lives here as well. Young members keep not only hands but heads, in training letters, numbers, weights and measures, the usages of law. Pattern books are chained in cupboards, foreign measures copied in margins, notes on dyes and tempers written in careful hands. Traders home from distant fairs stand on benches to tell of fashions in Bruges or new devices at Milan, widening every ear's horizon. Pride is kept like a relic. Charters are read aloud on anniversaries, seals are kissed, old masters' names recited. A guild remembers that its members are neither serfs nor hirelings, but skilled makers whose labour clothes, feeds and secures the town. On great days they march in livery beneath the saint's statue, drums thudding, trumpets bright. Not all is pomp. At dusk the hall softens, lamps gutter low as clerks finish sums, a watchman drifts along the porch. Sometimes the senior men meet in quiet to weigh a dispute, or plan a price rise before winter. Sometimes a road-tired journeyman is given a corner by the hearth and a bowl of stew, safe under the Brotherhood's roof. The building itself wears the town's years. Knife nicks on the dais from exuberant oaths, a scorch on a beam from a feast too merry. Initials carved by apprentices on their first day and traced again, older, on the day they brought a masterpiece. Even the floorboards seem to remember the weight of hope. So when you picture a medieval city, do not see only the Lord's Tower or the Bishop's Palace. See this hall, sturdy, busy, proud. Here ordinary hands found strength in unity. Here skill became power, and care became law. Here a town's very identity was forged, one oath, one masterpiece, one shared meal at a time. When the sun slips behind the gables and the last shutters thud into place, candles bloom in narrow windows. Hot tallow scents the cooling streets. Little by little the town yields to another company, the watch. Cloaked figures lift lanterns and step into the lanes, keepers of quiet hours who stand between sleep and trouble. Curfew rings slow and solemn from church or hall. Doors bar, bolts throw, and the great gates murmur shut on iron hinges. Inns and alehouses soften their roar to a purr behind drawn shutters. After that, only late travellers, healers on summons, and the watch have honest reason to move beneath the stars. They mustered before dusk in the squat guardhouse, by the market cross, stone walls, a smoking hearth, racks of halberds and spears. The captain called the roll, townsmen on rota mixed with a handful of hard-bitten sergeants, and issued lanterns, keys, and a horn or rattle to each pair. Cloaks were pulled up, orders were brief and known by heart. A single taper lends all the lanterns their glow. Hornpanes fog with breath, iron frames creak on their handles. Boots ring on wet cobbles as the patrols split and slip away. 2 to the riverside, 2 to the wall walk, 1 to the Smith Street and its embered forges, 1 to the dark tangle of alleys behind the bakehouses. Their business is humble and exacting. They try door latches and window bars, warn the careless and note a shutter left loosely pinned. They sniff for smoke where no fire should be, knowing how fast flame runs a timber town. Buckets and axes ride on a handcart, forever ready. A word here, a knock there. Most nights the lantern does more work than the spear. On the walls the sentinels pace, lanterns hooded against wind. They listen, as much as look, for the thud of a late hoof, the plash of a hidden boat, the far cough of a stag that might be men. Keys to the postern and gate hang heavy at the captain's belt. Once the day's bar drops, mercy is rare before dawn. The men are an odd muster. A baker's son with broad shoulders, a tailor's brother with quick eyes, a grizzled sergeant who could smell rain and trouble, an apprentice who has never seen the hills by day and knows the town by its night sounds. They talk in low voices to stay awake, share a heel of bread, stamp warmth back into their feet. The night finds them work enough. A doctor hurries by with his satchel. They fall in to see him safe to a patient's door. A drunkard spills from a tap room, all song and wobble. They steer him home or to a bench in the guardhouse if he grows teeth. A shutter quivers. A shadow tests a latch. A horn note breaks the calm and feet pound. Old houses blinking awake at the racket as a thief learns what town law feels like. Supersticid walks at their heels. They cross themselves passing the old gallows field, avoid a drain whose steam folk call a ghost, tuck tiny medals at their throats. The rowan sprig in a sergeant's glove is nobody's business but his own, yet duty holds them straighter than fear. Winter sharpens the work. Snow squeaks under boots. The lantern's amber feels small as a candle in a cave. Frost takes fingers through gloves, beards rim with ice. The river smokes blackly. Still the rounds go on, because a spark in a frozen night burns no slower, because hunger and bandit do not heed the calendar. Between circuits the guardhouse's harbour, men crowd the hearth, must by steam and smoke, and pass a shared flask. The captain scratches the ledger, shutters fastened, strangers questioned, a fishmonger fined for after-curfew bartering, 2 drunks delivered to wives, 1 brazier doused in a loft before it found the thatch. If the alarm bell tolls, fire, riot, breach, the ledger shuts and the door opens like a bow unloosed. By night the town is a different book to read. The market smells ghost up from stone, old fish, crushed herbs, spilled wine. A wheel creaks in a yard where someone works past lawful hours. A knock and a warning settle it. Churches loom pale, saints glimmering briefly in horn-glass glow. A cat startles a patrol and then pretends she meant to. Not every hour is hazard. A pilgrim train arrives late, lanterns bobbing like minnows. They are shepherded toward the Abbey guest house. A cold minstrel sings for shelter. A watchman listens, chin on halberd, and finds a space by the hearth. Once, a comet burns a silver wound across the sky, and the patrol stands in sudden silence together, small as pins under it. There are rough nights too. A brawl boils out of an alehouse. The watch wades in with staves and firm hands. A smuggler's punt noses a reed bed. Lanterns bloom along the bank like a trap of fireflies. A warehouse goes to ash so fast the stars seem to tilt. Chains of buckets beat flame back by inches, faces blacked with smoke and brows shining with ice. The town breathes again at dawn as if it had been holding it all night. Toward morning the cold loosens and the sky goes from iron to pearl. Curfew's shadow lifts. Gates unbar, chains clank, and the first carts grumble in from the fields. Bakers kindle ovens. A bell rings prime. The watch trails home in 2 and 3s, lanterns sputtering out, boots white with frost, a yawn big as a doorway. In the ledger, the captain writes the last line of the night, quiet, or not so quiet, and blots it with sand. Keys are hung, halberds racked, cloaks shaken over the step. By the time the market wakes, the men who kept it sleep are asleep themselves, their work vanished like breath. There is no uniform word for them, note soldiers as we know them, not constables in the modern sense, only the town's own guardians, lantern-bearers with steady feet and plain courage. They are the thin thread that holds back fire, mischief and fear, long enough for bakers to bake and children to dream. So imagine them when you picture medieval night, cloaks dark against darker lanes, a bobbing pane of amber light, the hush of cobbles under careful steps. The city breathes because they do. A slow, safe rhythm between one day's last bell and the next day's first. At the very edge of the town, where the cobbled streets meet the river's steady current, stands a bridge of ancient stone. Its arches rise with quiet grace, moss tucked into their crevices, and its worn surface bears the smooth polish of countless footsteps. Each day it carries wagons, riders, and wandering souls across the slow green water, yet it seems unhurried, content to watch the flow of life pass over and beneath its span. Some say a hermit chose the crossing long ago, teaching men where the river ran shallow. Others swear a brotherhood of bridge builders came with carts of lime and oak, laying stout cofferdams and whispering prayers, while water lapped their knees. Whatever the truth, the bridge stands patient, its stones knit by mortar and tine, its parapets nicked by centuries of elbows and rain. At dawn the bridge wakes to the sound of wheels and hooves. Farmers come first, their carts piled high with hay or sacks of grain. The animals snort and stamp, steam curling from their muzzles in the chill air. Ferrymen, idle now, lean against their poles and watch with mild envy, for when the water runs low and calm, the bridge takes most of their trade. Still, some travellers prefer a quiet float and will seek them out later, paying in gossip as well as coin. On market days, a bell rings from the gate and the pace quickens. From the town side, guards in half-polished mail take their post by a small gatehouse. They nod to familiar faces and inspect strangers with calm but watchful eyes. A toll is collected from merchants carrying goods for sale, small coins dropped into a wooden box, noted by a scribe who sits at a desk just inside the shelter. The board above lists exemptions in fading ink: clergy on church business, messengers bearing the Lord's seal, the poor in times of dearth. The scribe warms his fingers over a cup of thin ale and writes in a neat, stubborn hand. Names, goods, number of beasts, the weather's temper, even oddities worth noting. One man with a dancing bear, a cart of glass carefully swaddled, 2 casks smelling of tar and oranges, all find their way into his ledger. History accumulates here, one patient line at a time. As the sun lifts higher, the bridge becomes lively. Tradesmen cross on foot, balancing baskets of wares or shouldering bundles of firewood. A butcher leads a fattened pig on a rope, its squeals echoing across the water. Children chase one another along the low parapet until a guard shouts good-naturedly to keep them from tumbling in. Dogs trot at their master's heels, tails wagging, pause to sniff where yesterday's travellers spilled grain or fruit. Below, the river moves with patient strength. Its surface ripples green and brown, reflecting bits of sky between drifting leaves. Flat-bottomed boats hug the banks, loaded with barrels or firewood, while small fishing craft slip quietly toward deeper water. An eel fisher tends his wicker traps near an eddy. A reed warbler scolds him from the reeds. Now and then a ferryman calls up to the bridge, offering a ride to someone who fears heights or simply craves a gentler pace. The splash of poles and the creak of ropes mingle with the echo of footsteps above. Midway along the span stands a tiny chapel tucked into the upstream parapet, its niche holding a weather-softened saint. Travellers touch the stone as they pass or drop a coin into the alms box, more for luck than piety, though luck and grace feel akin on moving water. On certain mornings a priest says a brief blessing for those bound to long roads, pilgrims with conch shells, merchants rolling north to fairs, a widow returning to kin. From the far side the road bends into fields and forest. Travellers come out of that pale distance with stories stitched to their cloaks. A tinker with pans that flash like minnows, a pair of minstrels harmonizing as they walk, a troop of pack mules draped in striped blankets and smelling faintly of resin and spice. Some stop on the crown of the bridge to gaze back at the town, its rooftops huddled like geese, its spire catching the sun. Others lower their heads and press on, thinking of warm broth and a bed within the walls. By mid-morning the stones have shed their chill. A tanner's boy trots over with skins draped across his back, eyes watering at the guard's jokes about the smell. A brewer's cart rattles past with iron-hooped barrels bound for a manor river. A noble's carriage follows, springs complaining, its windows clouded with breath. The guards bow just enough as it passes. A peddler spreads ribbons, pins and wooden whistles on a scrap of cloth against the parapet, selling to those who cannot resist a small brightness before home. The toll house is never still. A drover argues about whether 7 calves count as 6, receiving the scribe's unbending stare and the guard's easy shrug. 2 carters dispute right of way. The taller guard settles it by walking ahead with a lazy dignity that parts them like water. A traveller asks the road to the abbey and learns to watch for the alder grove and a white stone set like a tooth in the verge. On a calm day the bridge hosts small rituals. Lovers trade ribbons in the lee of a buttress. A mason, hat off, runs his palm over an old repair and nods to himself, thinking of winter frost and spring floods. A widow sits with her basket, selling hazelnuts and stories with equal success. The river keeps its own counsel. Sometimes it glides clear enough to show brown backs of fish and the dark hump of a drowned stump lodged against a pier. Sometimes it runs the colour of hammered pewter, wind-scuffed and impatient. In spate it rages, driving branches and the occasional luckless goose against the starlings' nests under the arches. Then the town leans over its walls and murmurs, remembering floods that bit the bridge's feet and gnawed away a span in some older winter. Maintenance is a quiet labour woven through the year. Masons chip out tired mortar and press in new, chalky and neat. A crane squats like a wooden heron on the bank, ready to lift a fresh-dressed block. The bridge warden, a spare man with careful eyes, keeps tallies of lime, oak piles and wages, his little office smelling of vellum and damp wool. He knows each crack by name and worries them like beads in prayer. At noon the stones grow friendly warm. A fisherman props his pole against the parapet, hoping for a roach under the slack water. The peddler's ribbon glows like a fallen strip of sky. A pair of clerks pause to eat bread and cheese, their ink-hardened fingers grateful for sun. They speak of rents and reckonings, of tides in ledgers and real tides under their feet. On feast days the bridge is a processional road. Banners sway, choristers' voices drift like swallows. Townsfolk throw herbs that leave the arches smelling briefly of mint and thyme. The saint in the niche wears a garland. Boats cluster below to watch, their hulls tapping together like contented pots. That evening, lanterns hung along the parapet turn the span into a slow, glowing necklace. Sometimes excitement stirs without warning. A hunting party comes thundering back, hounds elping, antlers rocking in dime with hoofbeats. A troop of soldiers crosses at measured pace, armour chinking and eyes forward, the town parting for them as wheat before a wind. Once, a wagon breaks an axle on the uneven stones, and half the bridge gathers to lift and brace, offering tools, curses and advice in equal measure until the wheel sits true again. Not all traffic is welcome. Pickpockets drift like minnows in a shoal, bright-eyed for chance. The guard's gaze pins them to the parapet until they find other waters. Beggars cluster by the chapel on certain days, their bowls a muffled choir. The scribe recognizes many and keeps a quiet note of who is new, who is a veteran, who slips back across at dusk with more energy than a day's want might allow. By late afternoon, shadows lengthen like ink spilling from the arches. Farmers return with empty carts, faces netted with dust and satisfaction. Merchants tally by touch as they walk, moving coins pocket to pocket in a private abacus. The peddler has fewer ribbons now and a smile that says he guessed rightly about the power of blue. Weather writes its own chapters. In summer, heat makes the stone smell faintly of dust and lichen. Small lizards flicker in the crevices and vanish. In autumn, the parapet gathers leaf drifts like a low hedge. Boots carry the crisp scent of rotten apple. Winter lays a glassy film. Sand is strewn along the crown, and the warden mutters at icicles' sly chisels. Spring come in with a rattle of rain on slate, the river lifting its shoulders and shouldering aside careless sticks and the pride of boys. At the edge of evening, a minstrel arrives from the road and takes his seat on the warmest stretch of wall. He tunes a lute and picks a tune that gathers coins as surely as dew gathers on grass tips. Songs of hills far off, of a girl who waited, of a king who did not. The guards allow it. Music keeps tempers from flaring when carts must pass nose to nose. For a little while the bridge is an audience, then it becomes a road again. Toward dusk, geese cross in a line below, white stitches on the river's dark cloth. Washerwomen fold their day into baskets and call across the water, voices looping under the arches to answer themselves. Ferrymen tie over their boats, hats tipped low against midge clouds rising like smoke. The gatekeeper calls the last warning before curfew. The great doors at the town end begin to draw in like eyelids. A final flurry of travellers comes, a caravan with bells on their mules, a lone rider hard from the road, a pair of pilgrims who quicken pace at the bell's complaint. The toll chest is locked, the ledger's page is sanded, the quill laid to rest like a tired bird. Night settles and lanterns bloom along the parapet, small amber islands in a widening sea of blue. The river keeps whispering, a tale told to itself. The guards walk their rounds, boots tapping a rhythm the bridge has known since the first sandal crossed its back. A dog pads over alone, nose low, convinced some invisible friend has gone just ahead. Winter nights carry other sounds, ice tinkling under the arches like fragile bells, the crack of a floe shouldering a pier, the quick footfalls of a runner bearing a message sealed with wax, the guards waving him through with a glance at the signet. In flood time the bridge hums with force, water hissing like a smith's quench around the cutwaters. Then watchmen stand with lanterns and tight jaws, measuring millstones of drift and praying the old stones remember their schooling. On rare mornings fog pours low and thick, turning the span into a road between worlds. The parapets bead with water, voices close by sound far away. The chapel saint wears a damp cowl. Travellers proceed by touch and trust, and the guards' lanterns hang like moons, guiding steps by soft intention rather than order. The bridge belongs to life's passages. A wedding party crosses with flowers and laughter, the bride's shoes scuffing a blessing into the stone. A funeral moves the other way at a walking pace, the river keeping time, the saint's niche, collecting a glance and a coin. Newborns are carried over for the first time and old men for the last. The bridge remembers both without distinction. Stories cling to it. Children swear there is a mason's mark shaped like a fish that brings luck if you find it before breakfast. Boatmen tell of a night a saint walked the parapet in a storm, pointing where the rope should be thrown to save a cart horse. The scribe laughs and writes both in the margin of his own mind, because sometimes stories turn out to be instructions written slant. By full night the bridge is nearly deserted. The toll house stands dark except for a single candle in the scribe's window, where he finishes one last careful line before bed. A watchman leans on the parapet and counts stars twice, once in the sky, once in the river. Somewhere an owl folds the air and leaves nothing but the memory of silence deeper than before. Yet even in stillness the bridge remains alive in quiet ways. It holds the day's footsteps, the laughter and quarrels, the prayers smudged with thumb oil, the small exchanges of coin and kindness. Tomorrow it will feel them all again, the tramp of boots, the creak of carts, the sweet strains of some new minstrel's tune. Strong and patient it binds town to road and people to one another, a steadfast span across time as well as water. At the centre of the town, where streets draw toward one another like threads to a spindle, rises the church tower. Its stone is old and weather-mellowed, patched here and there with newer blocks that shine a paler grey. In morning light the tower looks almost gentle, but close it is a thing of strength. Deep-set slits for windows, a narrow door of oak bound in iron, and the faint ring marks on the step where countless feet have turned in and out. At its crown, shuttered arches hold the dark mouths of bells that have spoken to the town for longer than anyone living can remember. Before dawn, when the streets still dream and frost sits in the seams of the cobbles, Aldrich the bellman comes with a lantern. He keeps its flame cupped, with one palm against the breeze that slides down from the roofs. His cloak smells faintly of smoke and rain. His boots know every hidden dip in the worn stair. He touches the oak door as one greets an old friend and fits the iron key into its familiar bite. The tower receives him with a soft groan as it opens, stone waking to the day's first footfalls. Inside, the tower air is cool, and smells of dust, damp lime, and old rope. The lantern glow finds motes that drift like slow snow, stirring as the door closes. A narrow stair curls upward against the wall, its treads cupped by centuries. Aldrich begins to climb. His left hand knows each stone of the central pier, his right hand keeps the lantern steady. The sound in the stairwell is his breathing, the leather whisper of his cloak, and once, far above, the small iron shiver of a bell settling in its sleep. At the first landing he pauses to set the lantern on a niche and lift a shutter. A thin square of damp blue morning leans into the tower. From here he can see the thatch of the alewife's house, beaded with dew, and the long dark line of the river beyond the bridge. He listens. Somewhere a baker's boy rattles a bucket. Somewhere a dog shakes off the night. The town is stirring, and the hour must be told. He climbs again, passing the clock room where a wooden face and iron hands will later mark the noon. The mechanism hums faintly even at this hour, a patient tick that belongs as much to the tower as the sparrows in its eaves. Aldrich glances at the balance, sets a small weight with 2 practiced turns of the screw, and moves on. Higher, the stair opens to the chamber of ropes, and from the darkness there breathes the dry, clean smell of hemp. Here hang the bell ropes, each threaded through the floor to the loft above. They are thick as a wrist at the base, furred smooth by palms, each finished with a wooler's sally plaited in coloured yarn to tell it from its neighbours. Aldrich touches them one by one, as if greeting a small company. St. Michael's deep tongue, the mid-bell for work hours, the quick little angel bell that runs ahead of the rest. He takes his place, feet set, breath measured, and wraps his hands around the first rope. The first pull is a conversation with weight. The rope yields and then tugs back, and above, wood and iron begin their slow swing. The tower hears this before the town does. Its stones take the tremor like a heartbeat. On the second pull a sound gathers down the rope, rise of a note not yet born, and then, with the third, the bell finds its voice. The hour strikes. 1, then 2, then 3, slow and round, rolling over rooftops like warm bread sent from an oven. Bells speak in more than numbers. Aldrich knows the measure for feast days, the urgency for fire, the long sorrow for a funeral when every stroke falls with the weight of a name. He knows the merry peal for a wedding, when all the ropes are given to willing hands and the chamber shakes with joy. But the dawn hour is a simple speech. Be steady, be ready, take up the work the day brings. The bell's sound travels down lanes, along the river, and out across ploughland just greening under the sky. When the last resonance breaks against the tower walls and slides into silence, Aldrich coils the rope neatly at his feet and lifts his lantern again. His hands have the faint burn of hemp in them, and smell of dust and wool. He climbs one level higher to the bell loft, pushing open a door that sticks when the wood swells with mist. The loft air is colder. Pigeons have left a few white signatures in awkward corners, and a swath of feathers tells of a hawk's swift visit last week. The bells hang like sleeping animals, their bellies dark and glossed in places by fingers and weather. Aldrich runs a hand along the lip of the great bell and feels the shallow nicks of long-ago repairs, the low seam where the founder's skill turned molten metal into voice. He checks the clapper straps, the wooden headstocks, the pins where iron meets oak. A drop of oil on a pivot, a twist of cord where a fray begins, small attentions that keep the bells honest. In the open shutters, daylight grows, showing a pale east and roofs like wet scales. He steps out onto the narrow gallery that rings the loft, one hand on the rail. Here the town lies open like a child asleep. Chimney smoke no more than smudges, the Guildhall roof silver with dew, the square holding its breath, before feet and hooves claim it. Downriver, the mill wheel is still. Upriver, a field shows lines laid for spring sowing, a pattern only the height reveals. Aldrich breathes the cold and lets his gaze rest in each quarter, before returning to his task. When wind comes, it lives here first. It threads the shutters and combs the rope tails and sets the tower to a faint, unthreatening hum. On winter nights it can make the bells mutter, though they do not move. Aldrich, who has climbed in storms and in the thick hush of snow, listens to wind with respect. He has known a jolt of lightning to drum through the stone and make the farthest windows jump. He has known warm summer air that lifted swallows through the arches and set them to season-long conversations with the bells. Below the loft, in the room with narrow slits for light, sits the tower's small store. Lumps of tallow, coils of spare cord, 2 wedges for the headstocks, a basket with rags, a bit of beeswax for a stubborn pin. A shelf holds a book that keeps the bell ledger, names of ringers, the occasions, the times when weather required a change. Aldrich's script slopes like a hillside, steady and brown. He adds the morning entry with a stub of quill, blowing on the line where the ink pools. As the town wakes, so too does the stair. Footsteps will come later, the sacristan with candles to place before the morning office, the priest climbing with him sometimes to look upon the roofs and the weather. On holy days, boys come to pull the small angel bell in patterns they learn by laughter and correction. 2 strokes and rest, 3 and swing. Careful now, mind your hands. For now the tower is Aldrich's alone, and he takes the quiet as a gift. He goes down to the halfway landing where a little window shows the lane behind the chantry. A cat sits on a barrel, washing its face with solemn gravity. A woman opens her door and shakes a cloth into the weak sun. Steam lifts in threads from her pail. Aldrich smiles at these small signs and descends to the ringing floor for the next duty of the morning. The work bell that tells the craftsman the hour is turned. This one is brisker, a pattern that runs like a quick messenger through the streets. At the rope he sets his feet, and gives the pull its spring. The mid-bell answers with a cheerful round note, lighter than the hour bell but with a soft belly to it. Aldrich shapes it into the known call, quick, quick, pause, quick, pause, beat that sends shutters opening and doors unbarred. He can almost see the life it wakes, the smith lifting his hammer to its first strike, the weaver's shuttle taking up its dance, the potter setting a hand steady on the wheel. When the pattern finishes, the bell's last smile lingers in the dust and slips away. He takes his bread on the stair, a coarse heel split and rubbed with a crumb of cheese saved from last night, eaten standing with his shoulder against stone. He chews slowly, listening for what the tower tells him. A change in the small tick of the clock's gut string, a rope that sings a little sharper where it rubs. He feels the day settling into its course. The lantern on the niche burns low and he pinches it out, trusting morning to finish the light. By mid-morning the sun finds the east face of the tower and warms the stone to a faint sweetness. Aldrich opens the higher shutters to give the chamber air. He uncoils a rope and lets it lie in loose loops to ease the twist it has held since winter's wet. He tests the clappers by hand, moving each only an inch, feeling the weight his arms know so well. A lark, a mad fool of a creature, wheels up from the square to peep at the strange dark mouths, and then skirls away, leaving a feather caught on a splinter of rail. He frees it and tucks it under the ledger's cover. Below, the square is no longer empty. A girl whose hair plait shines like new straw rushes with a basket toward the baker. An old man carries a stool under his arm and sets himself at the well to tell the day's first stories to any who will listen. A pair of merchants measure each other with eyes polite and cold. Aldrich, who has never been much for bargaining, feels grateful for a life where the day's measure is made in sound. When noon comes, it comes with promise of meat steaming in kitchens and of rest. Aldrich takes the great rope of St. Michael once more. He draws breath and gives the bell its 12. Between each stroke he lets the sound finish its travel, counting in the slow space where the town breathes. In far streets, people lift their heads to hear how far the hour has gone. In the fields, men stand straight and look toward the tower, though they cannot see it. After the 12th, the air holds a moment of fullness like the top of a hill, and then slips downhill toward afternoon. Visitors sometimes climb at noon, when the sacristan allows. Today, 2 children with round eyes step carefully behind their mother onto the gallery. Aldrich keeps them close, shows them the ropes, not to touch, mind names the bells as if introducing old friends. The children whisper, and their breath makes small ghosts in the cool. He tells them, because they have asked, that the bells tasted the sky in a storm long ago and rang themselves without a hand. He tells them he once watched a flock of swifts turn all at once in the bell's echo and vanish like thrown soot. They stare into the mouth of St. Michael with reverence. Afternoon lays a hand of warmth on the stone. The clock ticks its steady thread, and Aldrich mends a splice where the rope has grown thin. He works with a sailor's patience. Unlay, lay, twist, smooth, wax. He ties a stopper knot at the end where careless hands might have lost it. He oils a pinion in the clock with a drop barely visible, then wipes away the extra, because too much kindness can be its own harm. He rests with his back to the pier and lets the tower's faint hum climb into his bones. If rain comes, he will close the shutters and the world will go soft and near. If wind comes, he will listen to the whale song in the arches and remember the winter of deep snows when he had to climb every hour to knock ice from the bell's lips. Today is temperate. The sparrows peck at lime crumbs by the sill and scold him as if the tower were theirs. Aldrich's mouth remembers a psalm, and he hums a line without thinking, and the tower takes the tune and holds it like a secret. Late in the day, a small procession below catches his eye. A bier with a single white cloth, 2 candles, 4 slow men. The priest's voice carries only as far as the square's edge, but Aldrich knows the shape of those words. He descend. In the rope chamber, he takes the mourning rope wrapped thicker to speak more gently, and draws the bell 3 times slow, 3 times slow, 3 times slow. The sound falls like steady rain. Women in doorways bow their heads, men pull caps low. The tower becomes a throat for the town's sorrow, and Aldrich is careful with the weight of it. When the bier has passed, he hangs the rope back in its place and stands a moment with his hand resting on the woolen grip. He has a small pouch of salt and a heel of bread in his pocket. He eats, thinking of evenings when grief recedes to the edges of rooms but never quite leaves. Slowly, the tower room warms again to the ordinary. Distant laughter reaches him from the tavern door as someone opens it for a breath. The scent of stew coys of a lane and is lost. Vesper's bell belongs more to the priest than to the town, but Aldrich loves it too. Its pattern is patient and thoughtful. He climbs once more as the west reddens. Shadows of the bell braces stretch long across the planks. The rope fur brushes his knuckles. He rings in the measured speech that tells the church to gather, and tells the streets that day is folding itself away. Even those who do not go to prayer tidy their stalls and turn their feet homeward when they hear it. At last the day's work thins to small tasks. He checks again the clock's great weight and sets its pull to the next fall. He folds 2 sackcloths, brushes a line of dust from a sill, writes a last note in the ledger about the splice. He sweeps a few pigeon feathers toward a corner so he may carry them down in the morning. The bell ropes hang resting now, their tails like sleepy cattle in a byre. Dusk fills the stair and the gallery windows dim to pewter. Down in the lanes, voices are fewer. The candlelight in windows walks the walls like tame fire. Aldrich stands on the gallery and takes the town in once more, the miller's boy fetching water, the cooper's yard with hoops stacked like moons, the bridge holding its stone breath over the river's last gleam. He lifts his cap in an old habit no one taught him and no one sees. Curfew is the last duty, and it carries a different weight from morning's call. It says not wake, but rest. Aldrich takes the rope of the great bell and draws the slow, even strokes, leaving room between for the sound to find every tucked-away place. Cats pause, ears pricked. A child turns in his bed and lets go the day's last fret. A woman at a hearth eases her hands from the dough and sets the lid on for morning's rise. The bell speaks, and the town answers with shutters and latches, with banked fires and quieter breath. When the sound has gone as far as it can and faded beyond his hearing, Aldrich coils the rope for the night. He descends by lantern light once more, hand on stone, feet sure as always. At the door he sets the iron bar and checks it twice, then blows the lantern out so the tower's dark may be complete. Outside, the square is a map of small islands of flame and small pools of dark. The tower stands behind him like a resting animal. He walks home by the lane that smells of old wood and damp lime. Those he passes lift a hand, and he lifts his. No one speaks loudly. The day has been said and answered, and night now is a cup to drink from quietly. Aldrich thinks of the bells above him in their nests of oak and iron, the ropes sleeping, the clock's heart taking its careful, invisible steps toward midnight. In his small room he eats a stew warmed on coals and a heel of bread with a scrape of fat. He washes his hands in a bowl and looks at the faint red burns the rope left in his palms, the little hairs of hemp caught like yellow threads. He rubs a smear of beeswax into the skin and it eases. He lies down, hearing in the bone of his head the memory of the day's notes strung like beads. Dawn, work, noon, sorrow, prayer, rest. When sleep takes him, it is with the sense of height and air and the steady companionship of stone. The tower holds the town and is held by it in return. Tomorrow, Aldrich will wake and climb, and the bells will speak again as they always have. Voices of metal and wood and wind carrying through lanes, across water and into fields, telling of tithe and of belonging. For now, the night closes around the tower and the town alike, and all things are measured by the slow, kind silence between the strokes. Some nights the tower's voice is called to sterner work, a flame seen where no hearth should burn, and the tocsin rolls out quick, relentless, a hammering that lifts men from beds and sends a line of buckets threading through lanes. Aldrich rings until his arms shake and the rope scorches his palms. When the last hiss of doused thatch answers from below, he lets the bell fall still, and the town's breath staggers back into its chest. On rogation days, boys with willow poles and the priest with relics beat the bounds of the parish. Aldrich gives them the angel bell in little dances of sound that skip from corner to corner of the sky, a leash of music to keep them together as they vanish between hedges. On the morning of Easter, he rings long before dawn, the note climbing pale air like smoke. On Christmas night he draws a carol from bronze that needs no words. In plague years the morning pattern changes, and Aldrich learns to space grief so that men can keep walking. He ties cloth over his mouth and nose, not because he believes it stops death, but because the smell of the herbs in the cloth makes the hours gentler. He writes names in the ledger until the ink thickens and the quill splits. The bells too seem to tire, their throats roughened by rain and sorrow, but they do not fail. Once in 10 or 15 years the bell founders men come. They climb slow with their iron mauls and narrow eyes, listen to each bell, strike a soft testing blow, and nod. One winter a hairline crack shows in St. Michael's lip. The town draws its breath. Aldrich feels the absence like a lost tooth. The bell is lowered with prayers and curses. A mould is dug in the frozen yard beyond the wall, lined with loam and straw, stamped by bare feet until the earth remembers smoothness. Tin and copper flow like sunlight in a trough of fire. The founder throws a pinch of salt for luck and a nail for memory. When the bell is born again, they pour her name on the waste in Latin letters and carve a little fish for the river. Her first test note is a shy thing, then she remembers herself, and the tower visibly steadies, as if a spine had been set right. Aldrich can tell weather by sound. In clear frost the bells carry like bright glass and seem to ring the stars. In fog they turn thick and woolly, and the sound does not travel so much as swell, as if the town were inside a clay pot. Snow eats sound, wind tears it in ribbons. In harvest, with fields open and hedges laid low, the bells run all the way to the far sheepfolds. In spring, leaves sip at them and send them back green. There is a ringer's brotherhood, loose as old rope but strong. On great feasts, men from nearby villages come, and Aldrich trades places with them, learning their habits of hand. They attempt patterns the young call, weaves not the high art of later ages, but enough to make the tower dance. When the peal goes true, sweat stings their eyes and laughter climbs the stair. When it tangles, they untie it like fishermen with a net, patient, teasing, joking as fingers work. Law and market keep time by the bells. Markets open on the work peal. The assize meets on the stroke of 9. Fines rise when a craftsman cannot swear, by St. Michael's noon that he set measure straight. The watch sets its rounds by curfew. The miller swears his sluice stanzas sung. The ferrymen their first crossing to the dawn bell's tale. Even thieves listen, though they pretend not to. They know when the city sleeps deepest and when the watch turns. The tower too has its folk tales. Children swear that if you climb the stair on Midsummer's Eve and count the treads without misstep, you earn a wish. An old washerwoman tells how, the year the river froze to the bridge, a fox crept into the nave and slept under St. Christopher, and the next morning the bells rang themselves, laughing. Aldrich keeps such stories in the ledger's blank spaces, never part of the record, yet part of what is true. Sometimes Aldrich teaches. A boy whose father is dead, a girl with hands that know looms and want more, he shows them how to stand, how to feel the bells rise in the rope before it shows in the arm, how not to snatch nor let go. You are not pulling a beast, he says, you are keeping company with one. He shows them where calluses will come and how to hold a knife to pare a burr from hemp without nicking the strength from it. He gives them the angel bell first, then the work bell. St. Michael waits. On a night of thunder, Aldrich wakes with the storm already in his bones. He dresses, and the rain nails the streets flat and shiny. The tower door fights him with swollen wood. Lightning walks the sky on iron feet. He doesn't ring in storms, no ringer does, but he climbs, checking shutters, feeling with his hand the tremor the thunder pushes into the stone. In a white pulse of light he sees through the shutter's slit the bridge, a ghost's rib cage over black water, and he thanks whatever saints belong to towers and ferrymen alike that stone can stand what it must. Years gather on the rope like polish. Aldrich's beard goes to iron filings and then to frost. He learns the weight of silence between strokes, as well as the sound itself. He learns to leave room for listening. On his name day the priest reads a list of those who rang before him, a thin line of men, and once a woman marked widow, stout, good hand. He thinks of their palms in his, through tie, and the tower feels crowded in a friendly way. When his back aches, he rests on the gallery bench carved by some mason's idle chisel. 2 leaves, a bird with a comic beak. He watches smoke from 100 chimneys draw the same slow letters on the air, and he nearly read the town's mood, a day of quarrels, a day of bargains, a day of births. The bells will write their answering letters soon enough. If you stood outside the walls and listened in the fields, you would hear the bells come like weather. Shepherds know them and answer with whistles to their dogs. Ploughmen stand up leaning on the stilts and guess which rope is being held. Children collecting kindling in the hedges say the town is speaking, and for once they are exactly right. At the end of harvest, when the last cart has trundled in and the church porch is dressed with a sheaf and apples, Aldrich rings the feast in long, playful phrases. He lets the angel bell chase the work bell, lets St. Michael roll behind like thunder that forgot to be frightening. Laughter lifts with the sound. Even the sour reeve looks gut and smiles with half his mouth. Bread is broken. Songs answer. When Aldrich is old, older than he ever expected to be, he writes an extra page in the ledger. Not a will, that is for the priest. Not instructions, the ropes teach better than words. He writes a few lines about how the bells sound over snow, how fog changes the world to a room, how a cracked bell can sing true if you mind it until the founder comes. He leaves a feather there, and a smooth pebble from the river, and a bent iron nail he once found in the mortar seam where no nail should be. And, as always, night comes. The tower cools, the ropes hang quiet as sleeping serpents. The clock's heart takes another small, exact step that no one outside will hear, but everyone will live by tomorrow. Aldrich sleeps in his narrow bed and dreams he is walking the gallery while starlings pour like smoke from the shutters. A bell begins, and the town turns toward it in its sleep, like a flower opening. So the days run bronze and oak, rope and breath, stone and sky. The bells knit the hours to the people, and the people to the place. They are made kind and audible, and their keeper is a man with careful hands, who climbs in the dark and speaks for the town at the start and the end of each day. If you pass through that square and hear the note fall round your shoulders, you will understand a little of what it means to belong. On a lane not far from the market, where the tanner's quarter yields to quieter houses, hangs a painted pole of red and white, with a twist of blue ribbon that flutters when the wind turns the corner. Beneath it a narrow door opens onto a room smelling of soap, warmed wine, and clean wood. The signboard creaks softly, and within, lamplight falls across polished basins, and a great chair set near the hearth. Here Master Jehan, barber and surgeon, keeps his shop and his careful hours. Morning comes early to this place. Before the bells for prime, Jehan sweeps rushes from the floor and lays down fresh, their scent bright as a field after rain. He wipes his razors on a cloth and sets them in order, blades shining like thin crescents. On a shelf he arranges jars of salves and simples, honey thick as amber, vinegar sharp as apples, goose grease shining pale, wine dark and patient in a stoppered flask. Everything has its place. The room holds a hush that honours work done with steady hands. A small brazier glows on the hearthstone, its coals raked even. Beside it stands a kettle in which Jehan will warm water for washing and for the steeping of herbs. A row of cups hangs along a beam, cupping glasses in different sizes, their rims smoothed by long use. Above them, wrapped in linen, lie rolls of bandage cut from old shirts and boiled clean. There are leeches, too, kept in a jar of pond water dark as tea, moving slowly like commas that have forgotten their place in a sentence. On hooks by the window hang his instruments, fleams and lancets wrapped in oiled cloth, a long-billed forceps for teeth, a bone saw with teeth as fine as a fox's smile, cautery irons that look cruel until one has seen them stop a death. Each is named and known, the raven for deep cuts, the sparrow for veins, Saint Apollonia's iron for dental woes. The strop hangs like a tame snake. When Jehan hones a razor along it, the leather hums as if content to be of use again. Jehan himself is a compact man with thoughtful eyes. His beard is clipped short and neat, his hair close cropped in the manner of his craft. Around his waist hangs a belt with pouches for needles and lengths of fine gut, a hook for forceps, and a small pouch of waxed thread. When he works at hair and beard, his hands move smooth as river water. When he turns to bones and wounds, the same hands become rock steady, the calm of long practice guiding every motion. The first visitor is always old Pierre from the baker's row, who likes his face shaved before the oven grows hot. He settles into the great chair with a sigh, and Jehan lays a warm linen over his chin. The razor glides with a soft whisper. the scent of soap and rosemary filling the air. They speak little, a word about the weather, a question about the price of grain, a blessing for steady hands. Pierre rises smoother of cheek and lighter of step, leaving 2 small coins and a grateful nod. After him come 2 apprentices from the dyer's hall, faces stained faintly blue at the edge of their hair. Jehan trims their locks and sets a comb's neat path through the crown, then dabs their ears with vinegar to chase the itch of dye and heat. He laughs softly when they boast of their master's skill, then sends them out looking sharper than they came, their pride mended with their hair. The pole outside turns lazily, marking the door as the place where edges are kept true. Not all who come seek a barber's work. A mother enters carrying a boy whose ankle swelled after a tumble from a cart. Jehan lifts the child gently and seats him where the light is kind. He presses with firm but careful fingers, feeling the bone's tail beneath skin. A sprain, not a break. He warms strips of cloth, soaks them in wine, and wraps the limb with patient spirals, explaining how to rest it, how to walk as if the earth itself were tender. The boy's tears lessen, the mother's shoulders ease. At market-days, Jehan sees the world in small. A carter with a thorn driven deep under the nail, a spinner with a blistered palm, a clerk with a boil he is too shy to show, until Jehan speaks to him as if to a brother. The remedies are humble and exact, a poultice of bread and milk with a pinch of sage, a smear of honey and vinegar under a clean cloth, a leech set just so upon a darkened vein. The work is a long conversation with pain and patience. When the door closes again, Jehan cleans the chair and the cloths, humming a psalm he learned years ago while apprenticed to a grim old master who believed music steadied the hands. He draws a comb through his own hair as he waits, glancing to be sure the jars are corked and the knives set back in their appointed grooves. Outside, the lane wakes to cartwheels and gossip, but the shop keeps its tempered quiet, a harbour for work that needs attention more than noise. Near mid-morning, the guild beadles stop by on their rounds. They have come to hear that Jehan accepts Saturday afternoon for bloodletting, and not on feast days, and that he keeps his basin rims smooth, his leeches sound. Jehan shows them his ledger, lines neat as stitches, who came, what was done, what herbs and draughts were given. They nod at the order and share a news crumb about a new boy at the barber's bench in the next parish, who cut too close and learned a sharp lesson from his master. Such is the way of craft, the hand must learn truth from the steel. Bloodletting is taken with seriousness here. Jehan has charts inked by a steady scribe, the zodiac man with stars pricked at joints and hollows, lines of the body and the hours when certain veins open to remedy a humour grown too bold. When a weaver arrives complaining of thick head and ringing ears, Jehan does not reach first for the lancet. He asks of sleep and food, of wine and weather, of grief. Only then does he tie a soft cord at the elbow and reveal the shallow blue thread that will give a little relief. With a small prick and a basin ready, the dark tide answers. The weaver watches without bravado, then breathes easier when the bandage is tied. Jehan knows the weight of superstition and the comfort of habit. He keeps at the back of the shop a glass flask for urine, faintly golden in the light. Now and then a worried wife brings such a sample, and he lifts it to the window, turns it with slow fingers, looks for cloud or sediment, breathes an inch from the rim. He cannot promise more than skill and care, but people take ease in signs read by one who reads them daily. He gives counsel mild and plain broth, rest, a little mint, and does not let pride outrun what he has learned. Just before noon, a teamster comes stooped and tight across the shoulders. Jehan seats him on a low stool and brings down the cupping glasses. He warms the air inside with a quick pass over the flame, sets the glass to skin, and the flesh rises gently beneath, as if answering a soft question. The teamster sighs, eyes closing, while the cups draw heat and ache from muscle to surface. After a time, Jehan lifts them, rubs rosemary oil into the loosened knots, and the man stands straighter, amazed by how the world's weight has lightened. A toothache follows, borne by a young woman with one cheek round as a plum. Jehan sits her where the light is best and probes with a slender iron, gentle, listening to the hiss between her teeth. The tooth is rotten. It will not mend by prayer or poultice. He speaks quietly to her, offers a mouthful of warmed wine, and shows the iron forceps. No surprise, no trickery. When she nods, he holds fast and draws with a firm, clean motion. There is a brief cry, a soft word, a cloth pressed to the wound. Then relief. He gives her sage leaves to chew and a little honey to sweeten the courage she has spent. Between such callings, Jehan is still a barber. A merchant with silvered hair arrives with news of river tolls and sits for a careful trim. Jehan shapes the beard as if sculpting a hedge, revealing the angle of the jaw, the line of age that keeps its own dignity. The merchant speaks of winter woolens and rumour of a far court's war. Jehan listens and answers in a manner that neither invites nor rebuffs, his attention folded mostly into the clean fall of hair and the neat snap of thread when a long whisker resists. On a peg by the door hangs a worn apron small enough for a child. It belonged to Jehan's first apprentice, gone now to a town upriver, where he has his own pole and basin and the same neat habit of writing down what is done. Jehan's new boy, Colin, is quieter. He keeps the kettle filled, the cloths boiled, the floor clean as a plate. His eye is good, his courage slow to rise, which Jehan counts a virtue. Better a cautious hand than a bold one that cannot feel a tremor in a blade. At noon they break bread in the back room. Jehan pours watered wine and shares a heel of rye and a wedge of cheese wrapped in cloth. He teaches without ceremony, describing how to feel a fracture's edge, how to listen to a fever without being fooled by sweat. He shows the apprentice how a razor must be stropped on leather until it sings a little when drawn through hair, and how a lancet's point must be neither needle-slim nor blunt as a nail. These small songs of the trade, once learned, never leave the hand. After dinner a priest arrives for his tonsure. Jehan sets the bowl, trims the crown to a shining ring, and oils the skin against winter's bite. The priest pays in coin and blessing both, and lingers to ask after a bedridden widow. Jehan promises to send broth, and to look in on the morrow. Charity is as much a tool as any iron, quiet, practical, kept sharp by use. Afternoon brings a farmer with a split palm from a stubborn gate. Jehan washes the cut with warmed wine, as he was taught, and draws the edges together with 3 neat stitches of gut, each knot tied flat like a sleeping snail that will not catch on cloth. He lays a salve of honey and vinegar and binds the hand with linen, instructing the man to keep it dry, though the work of mending fences cools. The farmer nods, grave as a fieldstone, and leaves the price in grain to be milled and collected later. Then comes a harder task. A boy from the mill with a thumb crushed under a wheel lever. The nail is gone, the flesh torn. Jehan breathes once and sets the room in order with quiet words. He sends the apprentice to stir the brazier until the iron is ready, not for burning but to frighten corruption with heat if it dares come. He cleans the wound with the patience of rain, hushed and thorough, laying plantain leaf to soothe, setting a new bed of waxed cloth to shield the tender place where a nail may grow again. The boy's breath hitches and steadies under his words. Courage, like cloth, could be held at the edges when the middle frays. A potter steps in with a shoulder that will not lift. Jehan prods, finds the shifted joint, and lays the man along the bench. He loops a strap around the wrist, asks the apprentice to hold, and with a firm, smooth pull sets the bone back into its nest. The sound is soft but sure. The potter gasps, then laughs, helpless laugh of pain leaving like a bird flushing from grass. Jehan binds the arm close to the body and counsels rest. the wheel can wait a few days for the sake of a lifetime's work. Now and then the work leans toward marvel. A cataract-blind old man, led by his granddaughter, sits with hands tight on the chair arms. Jahan has seen the couching rod used by a travelling surgeon and learned its measure. He weighs risk and need with prayer, opens the old man's eyelid with a silver loop, and with a touch as timid as a moth's wing presses the milky lens aside. The world does not leap into clarity. It wavers and steadies. The old man cries out, half fear, half wonder, because light has edges again. Jahan binds the eye and warns against pride. Healing is a field that must not be trampled too soon. At least as often, he declines a task. A woman arrives with a deep cough. Jahan listens and shakes his head. "Physician," he says gently, and writes a note for the learned man near the abbey who knows his Latin herbs and his measure of opiates. Pride can cost blood, humility saves it. He keeps fence with the physicians and apothecaries, as the guild requires and good sense confirms. When the light in the window begins to honey, a friar from the nearby convent arrives with a basket of herbs from their physic garden: yarrow, rue, comfrey root, and a handful of lavender bound with blue thread. They trade knowledge in the quiet way of those who work close to pain. The friar speaks of an old woman eased by mint water and prayer. Jahan speaks of a child's fever that broke at dawn with cool cloths and steady watching. Neither claims more than can be claimed, and each thanks the other for the share. Sometimes there is sorrow. Near Vespers, 2 men carry in a wounded stranger found by the bridge, a cut high at the ribs, blood dried and black at its edge. Jahan's face gentles as if to make a cushion from his skin. He washes the wound, whispers to the stranger though the man cannot answer, and keeps his hands slow when quickness would tempt less careful hearts. He packs the cut with clean cloth and honey, binds, warms and prays a simple prayer. If life stays, it stays. If that, the man will not leave the world untended. On fair days Jahan sets a small table outside. He trims beards for travellers, sets a tooth for a carter who will not risk an unknown hand in a strange town, sells a pot of balm to a pilgrim for blistered feet. Across the square a tooth drawer in a yellow hat hawks miracles with a drum. Jahan ignores the flourish and steadies his own line with quiet competence. The town learns who heals and who merely entertains. The pole itself holds a story: red for blood, white for bandage, blue for the stream that rinses both. Once, on a hot summer, Jahan's apprentice forgot to wring out the cloths, and the pole dripped like a wounded soldier. Old women clucked, and Jahan laughed and taught the boy to twist, 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 until the water sang out of linen in a thin silver thread. Such lessons, once learned, make both cloth and conscience tighter. As dusk deepens, Barber's work returns. 4 young men crowd in together for festival trims. The room fills with laughter and thin boasting that any razor can cut through. Jahan sets them one by one in the chair, and the shears snick and sing, hair falling like late hay. He smooths a stubborn cowlick with a drop of oil, and sets a neat beard with 2 careful strokes that draw a chorus of admiring noises. They leave smelling of rosemary and lye, slapping one another's shoulders, their pockets lighter, their chins braver. The last hour before closing is for tidying, and for those who need quiet help. A seamstress arrives with eyes shadowed by long nights at the candle. Jahan bathes her hands in warm water steeped with lavender, rubs balm into the tight cords at wrist and thumb, and trims the tiny burrs from nails that need to catch thread and not skin. He gives her a small pot of goose grease and thyme to carry home, and a counsel to close her eyes between seams when the bell at the tower tells the hour. She smiles and promises as much as work will allow. Colin, sweeping, finds a single grey hair curled like a question near the chair's foot. He holds it to the light and grins. Jahan shakes his head, amused, and points the boy to stow the cups and change the rushes. The leeches are fed a little, and the jar refreshed with cool water from the bucket. Razors are wiped and set by for honing in the morning, each returned to its fitting slot with the respect one gives tools that earn a livelihood. Jehan writes the day into his ledger. He notes the weaver's letting, the farmer's hand, the millboy's thumb, the stranger at the bridge. He writes a small circle beside the last, his mark for watchfulness in the night. He counts his coins, some bright, some dull, a few clipped where they should not be, and sets aside a part for oil and soap, a part for cloth, a part for the poor in coin or in stubs of candle against winter's long evenings. Before he bars the door, the midwife knocks softly and slips in. She needs a knife honed fine and a packet of thread waxed smooth. Jehan does this without question. They share a few words about a birth expected soon, and the grandmother's old remedies with fennel and caraway. Work meets work in such quiet exchanges, and the town is made safer by their overlapping care. Night gathers, Jehan banks the brazier and lifts the basin to hang dry. He takes down the pole's ribbon and smooths it, replacing it fresh for morning. The shop smells now of soap, and a fading sweetness of warmed wine. The day's sharper scents have flown out the window with the last light. He places a clean cloth over the great chair as one might set a cover over a sleeping child. The room, emptied of voices, keeps the memory of them like warmth held in brick. Some nights the door rattles after curfew. The watchman's fist, the breathless call, "Master Jehan!" A cut from a tavern brawl, a brow split on a step. A woman in hard labour whose husband ran to the wrong door first. Jehan lights the lamp and the brazier, and the shop becomes a chapel of work. He stitches in lamplight, the thread gleaming like wet spider silk, or heats an iron and stanches a welling that will not listen to cloth. He does not judge until the bleeding has stopped, and even then his voice is measured. The town pays him in coin, and, more often, in trust. In plague seasons the floor carries bowls of vinegar, and sprigs of rue hang by the door. Jehan wears a cloth soaked in herbs and keeps a tally no one asks to see. He does its boast mercy. He washes his hands so often that the skin reddens and cracks. He speaks through a door when wisdom requires distance, and through the night when fear makes distance cruel. Some are saved, some are not. He marks their names with a cross and the herbs that soothe them, not because the ledger needs it, but because he does. On a rare, quiet evening, Jehan sits by the hearth and mends the leather of the great chair where elbows wear the arms smooth. He sharpens the bonesaw's teeth with a file as small as a bird's bone, and oils the hinge of his forceps until they open like a whisper. He teaches Colin to bind a book the way one binds a wound, with tension, clean edges, no waste. The boy writes his name, and a crooked barber's pole, in the flyleaf with a grin he tries to hide. Twice a year the Surgeons' Guild calls its masters to the hall. Jehan dresses soberly and brings his kit in a leather roll. He watches demonstrations, some showy, some grave. He adds his name to a paper promising not to trespass upon the apothecary's trade nor the physician's prescriptions. He pays his due and earns his right to hang the pole another year. The guild's seal on his license is as much armour as any soldier wears, though it weighs less. Stories accumulate like trimmed hair under the chair. A runaway monk shaved clean and sent back to his abbey glowing with shame and relief. A soldier who came for a beard trim and left with a letter Jehan wrote for him to his mother. A child who laughed in the chair while a splinter longer than a needle came out of his heel without a tear, because Jehan told him the story of a knight trapped by a dragon and saved by a shoemaker's son. The shop holds these things, and the pole outside curls its ribbon in the wind like a bookmark left between pages. When the curfew bell speaks, he answers by bar and latch. Inside again, he strikes his small lamp and carries it through the room, touching each shelf with his gaze. Cups, salves, cloths, blades, leeches drowsing in their dark jar. The humble miracles of the trade sit ready for tomorrow. He lowers the lamp's flame, breathes a good night to the room without knowing he has spoken, and slips into the lane where the night smells of river and cool stone. In the dark, the pole is only shadow and the painted stripes are stories held within wood. But the town knows the door, and those in need will find it when morning wakes. Jahan walks home with steady steps, hands clean, heart quiet. The day's work settles behind him like a cloak, and the promise of tomorrow's careful labour warms like banked coals. The Barber-Surgeon's shop sleeps, its instruments ordered, its basins shining in the lamplight's last breath, ready to greet whatever faces and ailments the town will bring with the dawn. In every medieval settlement, large or small, one smell told of comfort and daily life more than any other: the warm, nutty scent of fresh bread. It drifted across lanes and fields each morning, rising from the village bakehouse, a humble but vital heart where grain became food, and neighbours met before the day's work began. Most cottages had hearths, but few could spare the fuel or keep a steady heat. So folk brought dough to a shared oven, trusting a baker who knew fire as a smith knows iron. The bakehouse stood near the green or market, thick-walled in stone or brick to hold heat. Its great oven was a low domed cavern of clay and brick, fired hard by years of flame. The door was a stout plank edged in iron, the floor a smooth dark bed where loaves browned. Before baking, the chamber was fired, logs roared until the dome glowed cherry within, then embers were raked aside, the hearth mopped with a damp scuffle, and the whole space left to settle into even heat. Before dawn the baker was moving. He stacked split oak and faggots by touch, judged temperature with a palm near the mouth and a pinch of flour cast inside. If it browned to hazel in a blink, the oven was ready. By the kneading troughs, pale ounds lay resting beneath cloths. Rye and barley for most, mixed maslin when both grains were scarce, wheaten dough for the fortunate. Some was raised by balm begged from the alewife, some by leaven kept alive in a crock that smelled faintly of apples and vinegar. The baker worked in a steady rhythm, fold, press, quarter-turn, press, until the dough sprang back under his hands and sighed out a warm, living scent. Tools hung within reach, long ash peels for loading, short paddles for turning, iron rakes and a hook to pull embers, a bucket and mop head of bundled twigs to sweep the hearth clean, a bristle brush to flick off clinging ash. On a shelf sat scales and nested weights stamped with town marks. Against the wall, wicker bannetons and flowered cloths for proofing, a bellows for coaxing flame, a crock of salt, a jar of poppy and caraway, and a small pot of goose grease for burns completed the little arsenal. By grey light, villagers came with bowls under cloths, dough risen at home, women with shawls tight, babies bound close, boys with flour on their sleeves, old men with careful steps and a baker's gossip to share. Each loaf carried its owner's sign cut on the skin, a cross, a chevron, a knife prick pattern, so there'd be no quarrel at the racks. The baker nodded people into order, tapped a peel on the doorsill to clear ash, and sent the first rounds sliding into the glow. The oven filled in courses. Heavy horse bread, dark with beans and peas for animals and the poorest tables, went in first to take the fiercest heat. Rye rounds followed, then the lighter wheat battards, and last the delicate manchet rolls for the manor. The baker read the bake by smell as much as sight. A shift from damp cereal to nut and toast, the faint sweet of crushed sugars browning, the nose prickle when bottoms neared too dark. He timed with sun and sense, not with clocks, and could tell a finished loaf by the hollow knock on its base. Between loadings he tended the rite of oven. In many places the lord held the banal oven. People were bound to bake here and pay a due, a coin or a loaf in 12. Elsewhere the baker leased the oven and kept a measure as fee. He weighed out loaves on his scale to prove honest ovenage, chalked tallies on a doorpost, and took coin, grain, or a promise by harvest. The assize-men checked him now and then, a Edel with a rod, a clerk with a tablet, for short weight or deceit drew stocks and shame. While bread rose and baked, the room filled with talk. The reeve murmured of boundary stones, the midwife shared a safe berth. A shepherd spoke of wolves near the fold. Children swept stray flour into little hills and begged crusts. Someone left a jug of small beer for folk to share. Steam hissed when the mop hit a hot spot. Peels tudded in and out with the quick economy of practiced hands. Not all dough was plain. Feast Eves saw saffron buns for those who could afford a pinch of gold colour, or honeyed rolls studded with currants. On Lammas the first loaf of new wheat was blessed and borne to the altar. On All Souls' Eve, soul cakes were baked and passed to children for prayers. At Easter, lighter bread after Lent returned like bright weather. At Martinmas, rich loaves ate well with new wine. The same oven-baked Yule bands, Twelfth Night King's cakes, and, with the last of the day's heat, gingered wafers pressed in iron moulds. A good bakehouse wasted no fire. After the bread came pies and pottages to set and slow-cook meat in coffins of sturdy paste, eels sealed in crust, beans and bacon to bubble in earthen pots. In the gentlest heat, apples dried on wooden frames, mushrooms shrank sweet, and herbs crisped for winter. The baker's wife slid custards in at the edge and tested them with a straw. The apprentice tucked in onions to roast until their scent turned sugary. By eventide, the oven gave back all it could before it slept. Flour was precious and fickle. In lean years, the miller's sack held more husk. Loaves baked darker and tight-crumbed, stretched with pea or acorn meal where need pressed. In fat years, the wheat ran white. Manchet rose tender and light enough to soak gravy and still stand. Whatever the season, bread set the village temper. Thin loaves made quick tempers. Plentiful loaves softened them again. Rules guarded the daily miracle. The assize of bread and ale set price and weight by the grain rate. A table hung by the door told how heavy a farthing loaf must be this week. Bakers kept a prover loaf to show no lightening by trick. Cheating drew harsh penance, a ride on a hurdle, a seat in the pillory with a bad loaf hung round the neck, or a fine that bit into winter flour. Most bakers needed no law. Their honour was in the crumb, even, well-baked, salt-right, no grit. Inside the bakehouse lived its small household, the ash cat, who dozed by the warmest stone and kept mice from the meal bin. The apprentice, whose forearms toughened and whose first lesson was to mind the peel edge. The baker's daughter, who stamped tiny pastry saints with a wooden die. The boy sent to the alewife for fresh balm, in a jar tied tight with cloth. Burnsav sat by the door, smoked goose grease whipped with honey. A jug of vinegar waited to wash a scald. The brickwork bore black gloss where smoke licked year by year, and a spider's web near the high vent trembled, but never quite burned. Marks sorted the village's bread. A widow cut a double slash like swan wings. The tanner scored a cross within a square. The smith pricked 3 dots with a nail. The baker knew them all and could point to a rack and say, "That's Goody Ann's. That, Hamo's boy's first try. That, Father Martin's Lenten rye." Mistakes happened. Once in a while 2 marks looked too alike, and there'd be a swap and a quiet trade of apology crusts. Bread served more than bellies. Thick yesterday's rounds, trencher bread, lined platters at dinner, soaking meat juices until they turned rich and soft. Then poor neighbours or the almonry received them gladly. Stale ends were diced into pottages or fried in dripping for farmhands' dawn meal. Hard biscuit baked dry kept soldiers and sailors alive on long marches and rough seas. Sweet rusk eased babies' gums. The priest's wafer, thin and unleavened, was the one bread the bakehouse did not make. Its wheat was milled white and handled in another sanctity. Quarrels visited sometimes. Someone muttered that the miller's toll ran heavy. Someone else swore the baker kept a sly loaf for himself. A jealous tongue said another house stole heat by slipping pies in without paying. A peal thumped the floor, a firm word levelled the room, and custom laid its cool hand on shoulders. Most days heat and laughter swallowed small sharpnesses whole. Season set the feel of the place. Winter meant dense loaves and early dark, frost rimming the door lintel while fire roared within. Spring wore the smell of damp flour and the joy of first wheaten loaves after fasting. The baker pared fuel careful when green wood smoked. Summer required a watchful eye. Dry rafters and sparks were poor friends. Autumn was a feast of work, barns full, mill wheels singing, oven doors opening and shutting like bellows from dawn to dusk. By late afternoon, racks filled the room with a forest of brown and gold. Children queued for heels, teamsters bought hot rounds to split with onions and salt at the cart side. Wives cradled loaves in aprons as if lifting babies. A traveller with road dust in his cuffs swapped a tail for a loaf and laughed at the cat asleep on the peel. News flew faster here than on any herald's horse. As the last batch cooled, the baker tended his quiet chores. He scraped and patched a crack in the dome with clay and sand, reluted the door, swept flour from corners before it soured. He rubbed a nick out of a peel with sand, hung rakes straight, shook ash from the scuffle, set tomorrow's leaven with a handful of flour and a breath of warm water. He chalked tallies, tied coins into a cloth, and set aside one good loaf for the poor bench and one for the priest's table. Dusk gathered. The oven's breath softened from blaze to warmth. The cat stretched and owned the hearth. The bakehouse smelled of crust, smoke, and the faint sweetness that lingers after heat. Outside, curfew bells thudded across roofs. Inside, the baker draped cloth over the kneading troughs, banked embers to coals, and barred the door. Night gave the oven back to the village. Its slow-dying heat warmed a corner where old knees rested. It dried wet cloaks hung on pegs. It kept a newborn's bathwater temperate for a mother who had asked. The walls held the day's voices, gossip and blessing, small worries and larger mercies, the way a good crumb holds butter. And then, before stars faded, it began again. A hand on the latch, kindling stacked, flour dust in a shaft of early light, the first hiss of a damp mop on hot stone, the first 2 loaves riding a peel into brightness. When you imagine medieval food, smell this room first. Smoky, fragrant, full of patience and neighbourly talk. Here hunger was held at bay and a community stitched itself together, loaf by careful loaf, day after ordinary day. If the bakehouse fed the body and the alehouse cheered the spirit, then the great hall of a castle or manor made food into pageant, promise and power. To step into such a hall on feast night was to walk into light and warmth beyond ordinary measure. Banners stirring in the roof draught, a fire great as a small room breathing at the open hearth, long tables braced on trestles and already dusted with flour from the pantry, the air woven through with roast and spice and resinous smoke. Long before a trumpet sounded for the first course, the campaign began. The household's officers, steward, marshal, pantler, butler, clerk of the kitchen, unrolled lists and chalked tallies on boards. From the larder came sides of beef, boar and mutton salted since winter, fresh-killed venison from the park, geese and capons from the steward's own demesne, carp and pike from the stew ponds, live eels writhing in tubs. From the spicery, pepper, grains of paradise, ginger, cinnamon, cloves, mace, saffron, dear as coin, sugar in glittering loaves to nipped with iron nippers. The dairy sent butter and fresh cheese, the orchard, apples and pears stored cool in straw. In the pastry, cooks raised coffins, thick-walled pastry cases meant to bear heavy gravies, while in the bakehouse the day began with manche loaves fine and white for the dais and cheat or maslin bread for the lower boards. The kitchen was a kingdom with ranks and rules. Scullions hauled wood and heated water. Turnspits, soot-streaked boys, lay prone and pushed iron dogs to keep haunches turning before the blaze. Potboys tended cauldrons big as baths. The master cook, knife tucked in belt, moved like a general, tasting potages, ordering sauces, judging ovens with the back of his hand. One hearth simmered a green pottage of leeks, parsley and marrow. Another boiled a fish broth for Fridays. In a side room, the saucier ground almonds to milk and strained them through fine cloth. In the scullery, knives and boards were scoured with sand until the grain showed pale. Kitchen bells rang for the butler to send up wine, the pantler answered for more trenchers, the ewery warmed water for hand-washing, and laid out ewers and towels as if for chapel. Meanwhile the hall was dressed to speak. Fresh rushes were strewn underfoot and strewn with sweet herbs, sage, rue, meadowsweet, to tame the stable smoke tang. Tapestries hung against draught and to preach the house's story, a hunt caught in thread, a saint's miracle, a border of snarling beasts tamed to a pattern. Candlesticks of latten were polished with ash. The salt, a high-standing vessel, was set at the Lord's right as a bright mountain that mapped the night. Above the salt, the honoured, below, the rest. On the dais a cloth of damask or good linen lay ironed smooth, and carved chairs waited under a tester canopy. Lower down, boards and benches spread like a river, pewter basins set at intervals, trenchers stacked, drinking jacks and mazers rubbed to a glow. Musicians tuned in the screen's passage. The herald studied his seating lists. Guests arrived in a rust of fur and damp wool, mud brushed from boots at the screen's passage. Vassals, knights, abbots, neighbouring lords, favoured merchants with the look of men comfortable around money, a poet with a borrowed mantle, a minstrel with a lute, a falconer with a hooded bird for show. Swords might be peace-bound, daggers left at the door if custom or temper required. The steward and marshal set places, reading rank like a ledger. Kin and councillors near the salt, envoys and abbots facing the dais, stout captains and worthy tenants below, servants and messengers at the far boards, peasants and townsfolk pressed in the screens to watch, to run dishes, to collect the wonder like embers to carry home. There was ceremony before there was meat. The almoner passed to the gate a basket and a promise bread set aside for the poor waiting in the dark. The ewerer poured warm water scented with rosemary over each guest's fingers into a basin, drying hands with linen as bright as altar cloth. Grace rose like a small tide, short on an ordinary saint's day, long on a great one, and then the trumpet sounded from the screens, and the first remove marched. Bread and salt began every piece. Manchet, snow-white, fine-crumbed, was set at the Lord's table, maslin and cheat for the rest, trenchers cut from yesterday's loaves to bear gravies and fat. Potages came heavy and fragrant, jewelled with marrow, strewn with herbs, then roasted fowl, capons, swans on very great days, peacocks redressed in their own shimmering plumes like a miracle, haunches of venison steamed, boar's head bristled and glistened, and pies arrived the size of drums, their coffins strong enough to travel to the buttery later. The carver at the dais drew his long knife in flourishes for show and precision for honour, naming each cut as he parted it, this the fair slice, this the humble. Between removes those formal waves of dishes, Hall breathed and played. Minstrels loosed a ballad of the house's founder, a lay of Troy, a love song quick as laughter to make the ladies lean toward the sound. A fool capered with bells, a juggler made knives blink in firelight, a bare-collared man coaxed clumsy grace into applause. The steward's finger scarcely moved, yet servants flowed like water, bowls away, bowls returned, ale-jacks topped with a tilt and twist to save spill. Spices spoke a language all their own. The pepper that pricked gravy said safe trade routes and a captain who held the straits. Ginger warmed sauces for fish, cinnamon and sugar turned a custard into a small festival. A hint of saffron in broth burnished it like dawn. Almond milk thickened a blanch-boiled chicken. Verjuice from unripe grapes sharpened a sauce green. A noble colour for fish on Fridays. In little boxes in the spicery, each pinch was weighed like a promise. Accounts for it would be locked in chests against the steward's reckoning day. Service had a choreography. The cupbearer guarded the Lord's drink, tasting before he poured less for romance than for prudence. The butler kept rank with wine, Gascon red for the dais, Rhenish white for honoured guests, strong ale for many, small ale for the pages running like wind between boards. Dishes obeyed the order of the banquet, pottage and roast, then entremets, showpieces, sometimes edible, sometimes more theatre than food. A pastry castle garrisoned with marchpane soldiers, a pie that loosed songbirds to the rafters, a subtly moulded sugar dolphin at sea on a tray of blue-dyed salt. After that, sweets and fruit, marchpane stamped with the house badge, wafers thin as a saint's patience, spiced wine, hippocra, poured warm and perfumed to lay the meal gently down. Manners were their own music. Few forks lived at table, knives and fingers did most of the work, and custom kept it clean. A man cut for his neighbour, not himself, dipped only bread into salt, wiped blade before it kissed the common dish. One drank with care that no grease filmed the maze's rim. One didn't scratch at itch, or pick teeth with a knife under the tapestry's gaze. The salt marked a frontier. To be seated above it was favour, to be sent below was still honour, but measured. Not every day gave meat. Fast days and vigils turned the feast to fish and dairy, pike and galantine, eel pie scented with mace, lampreys for those who liked their stubborn richness, almond milk did the work of cream, butter slid over peas on days when the rule allowed. Even then, grandeur remained. Subtleties in sugar, gilded wafers, fruits preserved in honey and spice that tasted of far shores. Seasons spun the menu like a wheel. Winter's board blazed with boar's head crowned in bay, beef in mustard, mulled wine deep as garnet, and nuts cracked underfoot. Spring brought lamb with green sauce, tender chickens, fresh cheese, and salads dressed with violets and mint. Songs were lighter then, windows opened to river air. Summer let the feast spill to a cloister gart or garden, trout laid on fennel, cherries tumbling in bowls, new peas sweet as gossip, fountains playing counterpoint to harps. Autumn was king. Geese fattened on stubble, venison from the rut, quinces and apples baked in coffins, new ale clear and proud, casks of wine hoisted from cellar with a cheer. Order kept splendour from collapsing into chaos. The marshal watched for quarrel flint, a jealous glance, a cup drained too recklessly, a word edged too fine. A bench shifted here, a dish diverted there, and tempers cooled. The steward's eye was everywhere, a page loiterer, a trencher too long uncleared, a candle burning to smoke. The chaplain's look cooled a coarse verse. The fool's quick tongue lanced a swelling vanity, before it rose to fever. Beneath shine ran accounts. In the counting room the clerk tallied pepper by the ounce, wheat by the quarter, firewood by the cart, candles by the pound. The butler kept tally sticks for wine drawn from butt and pipe. The pantler marked loaves issued and trenchers returned. Waste was a small sin in a poor year, and a great one in a lean. The almoner gathered what ceremony loosened, soaked trenchers for the hospital, broken meat for the poor line at the postern, bones for broth in the servants' hall. Dogs, more polite than tales allow, lay under tables catching only what fell by permission. Children fell asleep against mothers' mantles. Envoys leaned shoulder to shoulder in the screen's passage, discussing roads and tolls. A pair of minstrels argued, softly, the best verse to flatter a lady whose laugh struck like wine. Above the high board a falcon dozed, hooded, the jesses twitching at a scent only it could read. In the rafters, smoke and song braided into dusk. As candles guttered low, the feast gentled to its close. A final subtlety, a house badge in marchpane, was carried with a small flourish. The chaplain rose. Thanksgiving murmured like a tide slipping back down the shingle. Wafers and hippocras made a last round to sweeten farewells. Guests bowed and thanked. names and debts and favours silently balanced as surely as ledgers. Some found beds in the solar or guest chambers, warmed with braziers. Others mounted in the yard by torchlight and rode out into the night, their breath and horses streaming pale in the cold. Then came the reverse pageant, quiet as snow. The sewer and pages lifted boardcloths and shook crumbs to basins. Servants carried the salt and plate to the buttery and strong chest. The floor was swept of bones and rushes matted with spilled wine. In the kitchen, spits cooled, fat was poured off for soap and candles, knives were sanded bright, and a pot of bones went back on the embers for tomorrow's broth. In the spicery, boxes were locked. The clerk sanded his page and shut the book. In the pantry, leftover coffins were stacked, some to be sent to tenants with a lordly nod, some to mend tomorrow's pie with yesterday's pastry. By full night the hall belonged again to its own bones. Pillars shouldering the dark, hearth beating slow as a sleeping beast, a last candle throwing a saint's face large and kind on a tapestry. The steward made one last walk, palm on wood, eye on ember, ear on the wind under the eaves. In the yard an owl called. The watch changed at the gate. The great house exhaled spice and smoke and contentment. A great hall feast was more than eating. It bound lord and people with visible cords, bread, salt, grace, song. It made alliances out of courses, memory out of firelight, myth out of sugar and peacock plume. For one night the world's rough edges wore velvet, and winter itself seemed to stand outside the door and listen. So remember, when you think of medieval food, not only the humble daily loaf and safe ale, but also these nights when doors swung wide and pageantry married hunger, trumpets and trenchers, salt and song, the quiet skill of 100 hands making glory look effortless. The feast in the great hall was a promise kept in light and flavour, warming long after the candles died and the tapestries folded back into shadow. Every household, whether poor cottage or modest manor, lived by its kitchen fire, in a die before matches or gas, before quick stoves or steady ovens. Cooking was slow, craft built from patience and wood smoke. To step into a medieval kitchen was to enter the warm, breathing heart of the home, where bread and broth shaped daily life, and the rhythm of meals gave quiet order to the year. At dawn, the hearth came alive. Someone, often the mistress or an older child, rose first to coax embers left from night beneath ash. A twist of straw, a handful of shavings, a nest of dried moss. The first flame licked, then caught at twig and stick. Thicker billets followed, set like a small gate to tame the blaze. The room took its first breath with the smoke, sharp and sweet together, sap and soot. Sparks climbed the hooded chimney, or where no flue existed, wove toward the smoke hole and seeped into thatch. The iron crane squeaked as it swung. Pothooks clinked softly as they found their notches. A blackened kettle, beaded with last night's steam, moved over the new light. The space itself was simple but clever. In peasant cottages, kitchen and living room were often one. A central open hearth burned on a stone or clay platform tamped hard as bone, ringed by stools and a low bench. Walls, smoke mellowed to brown, held peg rails for ladles, string-wrapped knives and baskets of onions and garlic. Herbs hung drying under the rafters, sage, marjoram, mint, yarrow rustling faintly when draughts crept under the door. A quern waited in one corner, 2 flat stones, upper pierced for a wooden handle, lower set true and heavy. In better-off homes, a wide-hooded fireplace with chimney drew smoke cleanly, leaving room for spit and dripping pan, trammel and brand iron, trivets to stand a pot among coals, and a brick beehive oven built into the wall. Great houses moved the heat away. Separate kitchens, areas barns with long tables, drains cut in stone, larders and pastry rooms, and a range of hearths each devoted to boiling, roasting, frying or baking. The day's first cooking was humble and sure. Porridge simmered for breakfast, oats or barley beaten to grist, stirred with a split hazel wand in water or milk if luck allowed, a pinch of salt, a nub of butter when the cow was kind, a scatter of dried berries on feast mornings. Dough set yesterday might be ready, flat oaten cakes slapped on a hot stone, small ash cakes tucked in embers and raked out with a grin, or, when means permitted, shaped loaves carried to the communal oven with a cut mark or family sign. Leftover broth from the evening, a kale and onion pottage with a bone to give it courage, warmed for those who woke late or worked far. Children ate quickly from shared bowls, spoons carved from boxwood clacking softly. Men and women took their bowls to hands work. Morning built its music. The tread creak of the quern grinding grain little by little, the steady thock of a knife through cabbage and roots on a scarred board, the shatter of salt from a cone, the soft tap of eggs checked against a bowl. A mortar hummed under a pestle as garlic, parsley and coarse salt turned to paste for a green sauce that could lift even a tired fish. A child counted aloud while churning cream, singing a nonsense rhyme to keep the dasher's rhythm sure. A cat coiled close to the warm hearthstone, one eye or the dripping pan. A hen, bold as a lord, hopped the threshold to peck at a fallen oat until chased out with the broom. The smell of smoke and onion threaded cloth and hair until it became, simply, the scent of home. Fuel was precious and planned like coin. Faggots were tied and stacked all summer, billets split and seasoned under a simple lean-to, where wood ran scarce, peat blocks dried in sun and burned with a mellow root-sweet smoke. Dung, pressed into cakes and sun-hardened, made steady heat for slow stews. A good firekeeper knew her embers, how to bank coals at noon beneath ash, so the hearth would wake at dusk, how to shade a stew with a ring of cooler cinders and bring a pot to the boil by pulling it close to the heart. Flint and steel were slow, tinder grudging. The household spark was guarded more jealously than keys. Midday meal dinner was the day's anchor for ordinary folk. The pot took what the garden and season gave, leeks and kale, turnips and peas, beans soaked since dawn, barley to thicken and make a spoon stand bold. A smoked ham bone might tour the pot through winter weeks, lending salt and story before it was gnawed by the dog. On Fridays and fast days, fish, fresh from river on lucky mornings, or salt herring soaked and rinsed, set with onions, verjuice and a pinch of mustard seed. Eggs came when hens remembered spring, curds were cut for fresh cheese, apples sliced into a skillet and fried with a dusting of flour and honey if the hive had been generous. Always bread, dark rye and maslin in poor years, lighter wheaten loaves in rich. A jug of small ale stood by like another family member. In better kitchens the pageant multiplied. On one hearth a pottage jewelled with marrow, on another a white stew of capon with almond milk and ginger. Spits bore haunches that turned and hissed. A boy with smoke-blackened cheeks pushed the spit wheel, his glance flicking to the dripping pan he must baste from. A fritter batter rested in a cool corner, scented with ale. A custard trembled in a clay dish at the edge of heat. The saucier slipped wine into a pan and scraped the fond with his knife. The pastry cook sealed a rabbit pie in a hot water crust sturdy enough to travel to the Lord's board. A scullion scrubbed pans with sand and ash until the bronze shone through soot. A steward took stock with a chalk and board, salt levels in the hogshead, smoked sides hanging safe from mice, a whisper of pepper in the spicery jar. Tools earned their keep by the day. The peel slid loaves and pies into the oven's glow. The trammel ratcheted pots higher and lower like a measured prayer. A pot crane swung out to save wrists from firebite. Skimmers lifted fat into a pot for soap. Ladles wore down to ovals that matched the hand that wielded them. The baker's lame scored loaves with a cross or barley sheaf. The flesh fork turned meat without tearing. The griddle warmed oatcakes. A posnet with 3 little legs marched directly into the coals to fry apples in bacon fat. Even ashes had purpose. Lye water, drawn through ash in a trough, scoured grease and sweetened beans when a handful of ash went in the pot. Season and church shaped the kitchen like weather. Spring woke the dairy, milk foamed in pails, butter patted into rounds and stamped with a carved flower. Nettles and sorrel turned broths green, eggs returned like blessings. Lent thinned pots but thickened invention, almonds ground to milk. Fish days filled with herrings in mustard, eels in pie, pike with green sauce, and root veg made noble with spice. Summer offered plenty and demanded forethought. Beans strung for drying, herbs bundled and hung, cheeses turned and salted, fruits sliced and laid to sun or simmered into preserves. Autumn worked like an army. Slaughter days crimsoned the yard, hams salted and hung, sausages twisted and smoked, apples, quinces and pears stacked in straw, mustard ground, vinegar brewed, great brewing of ale filled tubs and tons. Winter slowed the sun and lengthened the stove's patience. Long stews, dumplings dropped like comfort into broth, onions roasted in ashes and eaten with salt, and careful counting of sacks and jars until Candlemas lightened the moods. Festive cooking transformed the familiar. On saints' days and weddings, dough sweetened with honey and egg braided into crowns, spice crept into pies and tarts, wafers pressed thin between iron plates and dusted with sugar, marchpane where purse allowed moulded into little beasts and saints' emblems. Neighbours came for the killing and stayed for the boiling. A whole pig turned on the green while the kitchen sent forth trenchers and sauces. Children darted like starlings, thieving raisins and being thieved of by a laughing aunt. The priest blessed the loaf, the fiddler scraped a tune. The kitchen hotter, louder, kept its order like a ship. Hoarding and hygiene shared a bench. Sparks leapt, so water buckets, sand baskets, and a soot brush sat ready. Ash was swept daily, but a velvet of smoke lacquered beams over years. Once a season, the kitchen was scoured head to hearth. Water was hauled, always hauled, from well or stream, cold in the wrists, heavy on the yoke. Every rinse cost sweat. Yet order reigned by custom, knives hung with points down, flour bags tied against mice, herbs labelled by where they hung. Clean and not yet clean bowls lived apart. A cloth draped over the milk to keep flies out counted as wisdom more than finery. Conversation kept pace with the simmer. Women traded gossip and remedies over dough, plantain for a burn, honey and vinegar for a wound, rosemary for memory. Men mended rakes or patched shoes by the coals and added their weather lore. Halo round the moon means rain. A cat washing behind the ear means wind. Children learned by watching and doing. Recipes passed as measures of eye and palm and spoon, to the size of a walnut, enough to coat the spoon until it looks right. Prayers stitched the work, a cross over a loaf, a muttered grace, a rhyme to keep hands honest. Evening meal supper was lighter but beloved. Leftover pottage was loosened with a splash of ale or milk. Bread toasted at a forked stick. Cheese sliced, apples cut. A sausage warmed on the griddle and shared. Rushlights and tallow dips chased dusk into corners. The hearth settled into embers that glowed like a cat's eyes. Pots were scoured with sand and a twist of straw. Wooden bowls rinsed and set mouth down. Scraps went to animals, bones to the marrow pot, crumbs to the hens. Ash was banked, a lid set over the pot to keep out spirits and mice, and a little ember tucked under for mourning, more beloved than any coin. For strangers and kin, the hearth meant covenant. A traveller's knock drew a bowl and a heel of bread if the larder allowed. A pilgrim's badge earned a ladle from the pot without question. Monasteries scaled the kindness to halls, as long as ships, their refectories fed by kitchens marching like cities. Bakehouse, brewhouse, fish pond, stillroom and herbery, each sending comfort on a timetable that matched the bells. Even the poorest cottage, smoke thick, pot thin, would stretch pottage with water and welcome with warmth. Illness came here for tending. A feverish child sipped barley water and mint. A mother mixed mustard and honey for a chest poultice. A cut was washed with wine and bound with clean linen kept for that mercy. Small ale steadied the sick where water could not. Broth nourished mouths that could not chew. Birth pains were paced by the kettle's singing. Death watchers warmed their hands over the fire and softened bread for the old. The kitchen held births and wakes without surprise, its floor salted with tears and flour in equal measure. Beyond the walls, the world scale echoed in the pot. Famine made the pottage thin, and the bread mixed with pea meal or acorns washed and ground. Good years raised hearts and loaves together. A pinch of pepper told of trade that threaded seas. Saffron-stained rice for great days in halls far richer. But e'en where spice never came, thyme and leeks and onion made a kingdom of taste out of the garden's reach. Night drew its line softly. After prayers, the family sat a moment in the wash of coal light, a last story told, a last stitch taken, a last check that nothing would catch in the dark. Embers were covered, the heavy pot slid aside, the dog curled against the warm hearthstone, the house exhaled wood smoke and bread. Tomorrow would wake the same ember to flame, grain to porridge, water to broth, dough to bread. Though humble, the medieval kitchen was the stage for life itself, birth and healing, feast and famine, love and quarrel, prayer and laughter. Here the day was measured without clocks, by boiling and resting, by rising and baking, by bells and bellies. Its smoke rose each morning, a small flag of survival. So when imagining medieval home, begin here, at the kitchen hearth. Watch the quiet mastery of hands that never wrote a recipe, and yet kept a family alive. Hear the spoon against pot and the low talk under steam. Smell the bread that forgives a hard day. Fire and patience turned earth and water into warmth. The hearth was the heart, and it beat the centuries through, one steady meal at a time. Step outside the smoky warmth of a medieval kitchen, and you meet a space as vital as the hearth itself. The cottage garden. Modest in size, fenced with woven willow or rough stone, it was not a place of idle beauty but of life and survival. Here grew the greens for the pot, the herbs for healing, the dye plants for cloth, and the flowers that whispered both faith and hope. Most peasant gardens lay close to house, safe from wandering animals. A low wattle fence kept out geese and pigs, sometimes hawthorn hedge or a simple ditch marked boundary. Fence posts sprouted living shoots and became hedges over years. Inside, soil darkened by years of compost and ash, lay in raised beds edged with stones or woven hurdles. Narrow paths of trodden earth kept muddy feet off tender roots. A few fruit trees leaned over apple, pear, plum, often grafted by a travelling gardener or monk. Bees hummed among spring blossom, and in summer the shade kept lettuces sweet. Tools were few but faithful. A broad spade shod with iron for turning sod, a two-pronged fork for loosening, a wooden rake, a hoe with a narrow blade to sever weeds at neck, a hand knife for harvest, a dibber to set beans and leeks, and a wicker creel or two for carrying weeds and compost. Handles were ash or hazel, blades kept with a whetstone tied to the belt. Repair mattered as much as use. Bindings of rawhide or cord, pegs driven tight, a lick of grease or iron against rust. Work began as soon as earth softened in spring. Household gathered with spade or fork, children fetched water. Women plotted beds with seeds saved from last year and swapped with neighbours. Crops were practical and layered, cabbage and kale hardy through cold, onions, leeks, garlic for flavour and strength, beans climbing poles cut from coppiced hazel, peas twining to wattles, turnips and parsnips fattening below ground, beets and carrots in sandy corner, in warm pockets against a south wall, lettuce, spinach and small herbs that bolted if given too much sun. Goosefoot and orache were welcome weeds when lean season bit. Companionship of plants was old wisdom. Leeks grew between cabbage to trick the whitefly, onions at bed edges discouraged nibblers, dill and fennel lured small bright insects that kept aphids in check. Beans fixed vigour in soil and came down as stalks for winter fuel. Near the doorway a little knot sage, thyme, winter savoury, parsley so the cook could grab a handful in rain without wetting her skirts. The garden was medicine chest as much as larder. Yarrow for wounds, mint for sour stomach and to sweeten breath, valerian to coax sleep, feverfew for headache and fevers, betony for all manner of head troubles, as old women said. Wise hands knew harvest times, morning for sharp oils in mint, noon for camomile's calm, late afternoon for lavender. Flowers served double, marigold, calendula, brightened pottage and healed skin, rose petals dried for winter syrups, plantain cooled stings and bites, comfrey knit bone in poultice, woundwort lived at to its name. Even nettles, scorned by the unwary, were spring tonic and thread when retted fine. Colour came from necessity, not vanity. Woad grew blue in a guarded patch. Its leaves were crushed, fermented, dried to balls, then re-wet and beaten to wake the blue. Madder's roots, dug after 3 summers, gave deep red. Weld offered clean yellow. Tansy, walnut hulls, oak galls, and lichen-coloured yarn in iron or copper kettles set over a side fire. Dye days ended with skeins wrung and hung along the eaves like bright pennants, the yards smelling sharp and strange. Fibre began in the garden too. Flax stood in a rectangular plot, blue-flowered and beautiful. Pulled by handfuls and dried in stooks, it was retted in a pond or slow river, then broken, scutched, and hackled into shinework often shared among households. The tow became coarse thread for sacks, the longest line turned to linen for shifts and cloths. Hemp grew where lords permitted, its fibres twisting into rope and sturdy cloth. Animals wove themselves into the plot's life. Chickens scratched for beetles and offered eggs. A tethered goat grazed edges and manured as she went. A pig rooted the fallow bed before winter, turning soil and eating grubs. Compost heaps, straw, peelings, leaves, dung and hearth ash steamed gently, turned with a fork when tin allowed. Urine-soaked straw quickened the rot. A sprinkle of soil kept smells kind. Nothing was wasted if it could become soil again. Water was fetched and treasured. Rain barrels under eaves caught roof run. Clay jars stood cool in shadow. In drought, buckets came from well, shoulder yoke biting in. Watering was done at dawn and dusk, slowly around roots, never on leaves under hot sun. A shallow channel cut with a mattock could carry a few ladles farther than arms alone. In frost-prone hollows, folk smoked the garden with damp straw at dawn to keep blossom from blackening. In spring, wicker cloches or mats of bracken sheltered tender sets. Seasons steered every hand. Spring sowing, transplanting leeks from nursery rows, first harvest of sorrel and chives, quick salads of young leaves, nettle soup to wake tired blood. Summer, abundance. Staking beans, weeding daily, pinching side shoots, drying and hanging herbs under eaves, cutting greens before they turned bitter. Keeping a wary eye for blight. Autumn. Storing and saving cabbages lifted and heeled into pits lined with straw. Carrots and turnips clamped in earth founds, onions and garlic braided and hung from beams, apples packed in straw, pears bottled, plums dried on strings, seeds dried in cloth bags labelled in a hand that needed only the shape of the seed to remember. Winter. The garden slept under frost, but still gave leeks and kale from under snow, parsnips sweetened by cold, thyme and sage evergreen for pot and chests. Pests and challenge were constant, and met with craft. Geese pushed through fences, so extra weaving went into the lowest rails. Rabbits tunnelled, so stones and thorn clippings ringed beds. Beetles chewed, so hands patrolled at dawn. Slugs drowned in shallow beer pots. Flea beetles baffled by ash dusted lightly over leaves. Cabbage worms plucked and fed to hens. Scare lines of feathers and shells rattled in wind above peas. Plants that suffered were moved next year. The worst corner rested under buckwheat, or lay mulched and left to heal. Order sat beside wildness. A saint's cross or little painted icon tucked in a corner. A scrap of ribbon tied to a young tree at Candlemas. Holy water flicked over seed at sowing with a whispered prayer. On rogation days, the priest led the parish to beat the bounds, and the path circled hedges and plots. Herbs gathered and blessed at Assumption, hung against lightning and illness. Folk swore the garden listened to songs. Mothers sang while weeding. Old men muttered weather rhymes as they hoed. Children learned here as surely as in church. They chased butterflies, yet learned not to trample, brought snails in little triumphs to feed the geese, picked pea flowers by mistake, and were shown the tiny pods forming, learned names. Good King Henry, Our Lady's bedstraw, St. John's wort, each a story. Old men told tales leaning on spades. Neighbours paused at the gate to swap seed and news, promise aid, or admire a fine cabbage like a small green cathedral. Not all plots were poor. Monastic herbers arranged beds by compass and virtue, with box hedges, arbours, sundials, and lists of simples copied into herbals. Manorial gardens added fish ponds, dovecotes, and orchards trained to walls. Yet even in ordered paradise, the hands that pruned and hoed dirtied the same way. Monks wrote recipes for syrups and electuaries. Peasant women held lore just as deep, carried in memory and work-hardened fingers. The garden touched every meal. Morning pottage brightened with parsley and thyme. Noonday stew thickened with beans and onions. Cabbage stewed with a piece of bacon. Summer salads of sorrel, cress, and young lettuce on feast days. Leekeno broths, peas pottage, herb pancakes fried on griddle, apples stewed with a thread of honey, mint tea to settle a belly, sage and salt for sore throat, marigold salve thickened with beeswax for cracked hands. Dye kettles turned yarn brilliant for winter weaving. Flax from the far bed became the very cloth that wiped the table. Wild company was welcome. Toads lived under cool stones and ate slugs. Hedgehogs patrolled dusk. Ladybirds dotted fennel. Bees from strawskeps visited borage and thyme and paid for nectar with honey that lit winter evenings and sweetened medicine. A patch of flowers for bees, mullein, borage, tansy, mallow, stood by custom. To harm a bee was bad luck. When a swarm rose, a pan clanged and a prayer rose too, coaxing them to a new skep rubbed with balm and mint. Soil was a living purse and managed thriftily. Beds rotated in a small dance-heavy feeders like cabbage after dunged ground, then roots, then legumes to sweeten the earth, then a resting mulch under straw or leaves. Hearth ash lined sour soil. Crushed shells from the river went on onions. Soot discouraged pests and fed beans. The earth repaid kindness with tilth soft as cake, and a smell like promise after rain. Making and mending shared space with growth. A bench under the eaves held a mortar for seeds and salves, bundles of willow withies for tying, a pot of lard and beeswax for tool handles and skin, a little still where law allowed for rosemary water and rose attar. A dye corner with a blackened kettle and a pile of oak galls waited for a quiet day. Skeins hung from a hazel pole to show success or scold failure. Festivals marked the plot as surely as the calendar. May Day crowned with flowers, garlands hung on door and shed, midsummer fires blessed herbs that would hang against storm and witchcraft. Lammas loaves gilded with a sprig from the best sheaf. Michaelmas thanked for cabbages and apples. Advent brought rosemary sprigs inside and apples strung to dry. First fruits went to church or poor. Generosity was said to keep soil kind. The year was stitched with small reckonings. Seed saved in paper twists or linen bags marked with charcoal. White bean from Joan, the long parsnip, Madge's kale. Stories attached to varieties like barnacles to a boat. A dry summer taught water wisdom, a wet one taught drainage. A frost taught which wall kept heat longest. Sorrow came in blight or theft, but resilience answered, sow again, share more, learn, and try the other corner next year. In evenings, when work done, garden rested. Sun slid behind hedge, bees quieted. The smell of warm earth and bruised thyme lingered. Parents sat on bench, a child in lap, watching hens settle on the perch. A rushlight glowed by the door, but stars gave truer light. Somewhere, a neighbour's pot lid clinked. Somewhere a dog barked twice and slept. All day's food and medicine whispered out there, breathing gently, waiting for tomorrow's hand. Though humble, the cottage garden was quiet power. It made the poor less hungry, the sick less helpless, cloth more colourful, and lives more rooted. Each seed sown was an act of faith against winter's lean. Each herb cut bound family to centuries of tradition. In that small fenced patch, buzzing with bees, green with cabbage and sage, survival and simple joy grew side by side, season after season. Outside, night has come early. Snow lies deep on thatched roofs, and wind rattles shutters with long, low sighs. Inside the cottage, the hearth glows, red logs stacked over steady coals, iron pot hung from the crane, warmth spreading to every corner. After a day of cold fields, mending, or wood-cutting, the family gathers for their winter supper, the simplest of meals, yet rich with comfort and shared life. The room is single and low, smoke-stained but warm. Rough beams overhead hang with drying herbs, apples strung in garlands, onions braided like ropes, and slabs of bacon curing in the coolest draught. Near the door, a pegged rack holds cloaks stiff with frost. Above the hearth, a small saint's token hangs from a nail, browned by years of smoke. The clay floor is swept and strewn with fresh rushes mixed with thyme and sweet flag for scent. By the fire stands a long wooden table, well scrubbed yet cross-hatched with the memory of knives and loaves, flanked by plank benches. The high-backed chair at the head faces the hearth, polished by generations of shoulders. Before the meal begins, someone tends the fire, a boy stirring embers with the poker, the mother laying a split of oak, the eldest blowing slow and steady until a shy blue flame lifts into gold. The crane squeals softly as it swings the pot closer to the coals. Sparks leap, climb the throat of the chimney, and star the soot. On the trammel, the iron links glint. The kettle sings. Steam curls fragrant with onions, cabbage, garlic, and a heel of smoked pork, a sprig of thyme, and a crumble of marjoram bob on the surface like little boats. The smell fills the room long before bowls appear, tugging at hunger and easing away the ache of cold. Cooking in winter follows the season's limits, and wisdom learned from lean years. Fresh greens are few, sturdy cabbages from the pit, dried peas and beans, and the last of the stored onions and garlic form the stew's backbone. A ham bone, saved and resaved, lends strength. Dried mushrooms from autumn woods give a dark forested flavour. A handful of barley thickens. A spoon of mustard brightens. A splash of ale loosens browned bits from the pot's sides. Bread baked days ago lies ready under a cloth, hard as a shield until it feels the fire's breath and softens at the cut. If the family is lucky, a crock of butter survives behind the cool wall. A small cheese, rubbed with salt and wrapped in linen, waits on the shelf. Those better off keep a little clay jug of ale or thin wine near, its cork knotted with hemp. Around the hearth the evening sorts itself. The youngest children play near the warmth, quiet games with a carved ox and a peg doll in a wool rag dress, or simply watching flames, eyes growing heavy. The eldest girl slices bread against her thumb with the small kitchen knife, then rubs each heel with a clove of garlic for the grown folk. One boy brings water from the barrel kept inside so it will not freeze, moving carefully so the ice rim does not slop against the sides. Another crushes a pinch of salt from the horn and measures it with practiced fingers. Talk drifts and eddies, weather guessed from the ring around the moon, hopes for next market, the Reeves news about a broken bridge, a story of a saint whose candle would not blow out in a storm. Sometimes neighbours or kin stamp in from the snow. Winter nights can be lonely. A guest brightens the room. They knock once, twice against the wind, then shoulder through, laughter and cold air arriving together. Cloaks are hung by the door, mitts laid on the bench to dry. They bring their own small offering, a knot of leeks, a pot of dried apples, a skin of small beer, and pour out talk like warm water. Whose cow will calve first? Which field's boundary stone needs setting straight? Whether the miller has mended his sluice? Hospitality matters, even when food is plain. Sharing heat and bread is holy work and human comfort. By the time the stew settles to that thick, companionable plop that cooks recognize as readiness, candles or rushlights are already lit. One rushlight stands in its iron clip, its flame steady. A tallow candle, saved for feast days and visits, burns on the high shelf and doubles itself in the shee of a pewter mug. The mother, or whoever rules the hearth, lifts the lid with a rag-wrapped hand, inhales and nods. She ladles into wooden bowls, the stew heavy and steaming, dotted with coins of carrot saved from autumn. Father carves extra meat if any waits in the pot's shadow. Shares are not equal, but they are fair. The old and the labouring get a little more, the small ones smaller bowls but extra bread to fill the corners. Before eating, a brief prayer tightens the circle. The eldest touches the saint's token and speaks gratitude for food, for unbroken roof, for the fire's small sun. A murmured amen, a shared breath, and the dance of spoons begins. Eating is slow and companionable. Spoons scrape wood, bread soaks broth until it glows, steam beads lashes and turns cheeks pink. Between mouthfuls, voices lift again. Tomorrow's chores counted: mending harness, fetching faggots from the copse, knocking ice from the trough, carding a basket of wool. The mother reminds the eldest to set the sourdough to rise near the warm ash. The father weighs whether the pig could be pushed another fortnight before slaughter. Someone begins a small joke at the reeve's expense. Someone else counters with a proverb older than the roof. Outside the wind mutters, but it seems far away. On feast nights, Christmas, Epiphany, or a saint's day, recipe brightens. A small roast turns on the spit, basted with ale and a pinch of precious pepper. A pan of apples, cored and stuffed with honey and raisins, sizzles at the hearth's edge. Thin cakes of wheat, hoarded flour beaten with eggs and milk, bake on the griddle. Candles multiply. A sprig of holly or box stands in a mug. Carols rise not grandly, but true, in dulci jubilo with half-remembered Latin, or a local cradle song with a refrain that fits any season. Children receive nuts and a strip of candied peel. Even the poorest keep a small sweetness for holy nights, trusting that joy invites blessing. Light and shadow weave quietly in their high old loom. Fire throws dancing shapes over beams, bunches of sage and rosemary, a twisted rope of onions, a row of wooden spoons, the long-handled peel for bread, a sickle hung until spring. The cat purrs at the hearth's edge, paws tucked, eyes narrowed to slits of satisfaction. The dog, snow still melting in his fur, claims the draught by the door with a grunt. The crack and pop of logs joins the hum of talk. The iron pot ticks as its heat settles. Once, far away, a fox yips and is answered by silence. Time loosens its belt and sits down with the family. After bowls empty, useful bust resumes. The eldest tips a kettle and rinses dishes with hot water, ash and sand scour away grease. A twist of straw dries the wooden bowls. Scraps go into the pail for pigs. Bone returns to the pot for tomorrow's broth. The crane creaks, swinging the pot off the direct heat. The fire is banked, coals drawn into a small hill, ash poured over like a blanket, a green stick laid so that dawn will find a core of red to coax awake. The sourdough crock is nested near the warm side, covered with a cloth that smells of flour and clean hands. Beds are made ready, pallets pulled close to the hearth for little ones, a straw tick shaken and covered with a wool blanket patched and repatched. Cloaks added where cold gnaws worst. The baby, if there is one, nests in a wooden cradle with rockers cut by a grandfather now gone. The cradleboard bears a carved cross and a curling vine. The eldest lays out tomorrow's hose to warm the rime from them. Leather boots stand near, but not too near the fire. Between chores comes the quiet industry that stitches winter together. Father mends a harness strap, all biting rhythmically, his thumb leathered by the work. He rubs tallow into the cracks of his boots and holds them up to the firelight to see the shine. Mother spins by the glow, the drop spindle humming, a fine thread drawing from wool teased by the youngest's careful hands. An older boy whittles a spoon from a scrap of apple wood, coaxing the bowl smooth. The girl patches a heel with a darning mushroom and a needle, a small miracle made of neatness. Music arrives without fuss. If there is a pipe, it's tuned with the tongue and played plain. More often it's the voice, low and close, a lullaby that knows every knot in the rafters. Ballad verses get traded and mended like clothes, the hunt of the boar, the ship that never came home, the saint who tricked the devil into mending a church roof. Laughter lifts and settles, a hand brushes a child's crown, the dog sighs in blunt contentment. Beyond the door, the world is vast and cold. Snow falls softer now, muffling the lane, rounding the tops of hedges into sleeping beasts. The church bell counts the hour, slow, bronze, forgiving, and the sound comes like a blanket from the dark. A wolf may howl from the far wood and be answered by the wind. The river groans under its new skin of ice. But inside the cottage there is order and heat, bellies full, hands busy or folded, the small, strong fortress of shared breath. Sometimes the night invites a visitor from need. A stranger, hat in hands, asks for fire to light his way. A widow brings news of a cow in trouble. The midwife knocks softly and is given a warmed stone for her pocket. The door opens and shuts, the draught follows and leaves, and the rules of care hold. A cup of hot broth, a slice of bread, a coal carried in a lidded pan, a brief prayer spoken at the threshold. Before sleep there are reckonings. How much flour left in the bin, 2 measures and a pinch, how many candles between now and Candlemas, whether the bacon will stretch to the next fair, whether the fence by the pig yard should be set with fresh wattle tomorrow. The ledger of the mind clicks with kind accuracy. Trust, not fear, closes its cover. Enough, if careful. The last acts are old and sure. The latch is set with its wooden bar. The cat is coaxed inside. The dog is left to his watch because he would not have it otherwise. The embers are checked again, and the ash smoothed. The rushlight pinched out between wetted fingers. The room shrinks into the radius of the hearth's red heart. A final tale, a final prayer, the sign of the cross drawn on the air with a soot-smudged thumb. Sleep settles as snow settles. Children breathe in a small chorus. The spindle rests in its basket. The awl and the needle lie side by side like old companions. The fire's last whisper is a thread of orange under grey. Above it hangs tomorrow's pot, already rinsed, ready to become porridge at dawn. Outside, the night keeps its cold counsel. Inside, warmth and the memory of stew, the sweetness of bread, the lamp of laughter. Such suppers repeated through the hard months built quiet survival. No lutes or silks, no golden trenchers, only thrift, patience, and the sacrament of sharing. These meals held Europe steady as any charter or wall, binding households with heat and habit, teaching children that plenty could be made of little if hands are willing and hearts are kind. So when you think of medieval home, picture not only toil and hunger, but also this winter supper by the hearth, slow stew and sturdy bread, lamplight and work-worn smiles, stories braided with steam, and the dog's contented sigh. In that ordinary grace, body and soul were kept warm through the long dark, one spoon, one log, one kindly word at a time. Before the first bell of dawn rang across the courtyard, the castle kitchen was already awake. Its walls of thick stone held the night's chill like a memory, but inside, a dozen small fires glowed where embers had been banked beneath ash. The air was scented with smoke, yeast, and damp herbs. Faint light pushed through horn-paned windows still drowsy with frost. Soon this quiet hum would become a roaring, bustling heart of labour, but for now it stirred like some great creature waking, stretching its limbs in sparks and steam. A scullion crept in first, barefoot and silent, to rouse the embers. He carried a bellows patched with waxed leather and coaxed each heap of coals until shy tongues of flame licked upward. He fed them splinters and then faggots, building the long, patient heat a kitchen needs. Behind him came the undercooks, yawning into their sleeves, shrugging off cloaks and pulling on stained linen aprons burnished by years of grease and flour. Without a word they set about the morning, lifting black-bellied pots from hooks, hauling buckets from the courtyard pump, unwrapping loaves baked in the night's deep hours. The great hearth, wide enough to roast an ox, shivered into brightness as the first logs caught. Sparks rose to the sooted vault like a brief swarm of fireflies. On the central boards, candlelight flickered over the day's first tasks. A boy sliced onions and leeks, his knife whispering against the grain. A girl bruised garlic and parsley in a heavy mortar, stone thudding with a steady, mothering rhythm. Barrels were pried open to reveal salt fish stowed in brine. Wheels of cheese were unbandaged, their rinds oiled and sound. Sacks of oats, barley and einkorn were shouldered to the pottage cauldron that hung higher than a man's head on its iron chain. A pot of yesterday's broth stood to one side, its translucent fat cap lifted away, ready to feed today's gravy and soup. The chief cook entered then, tall and grave, a leather baldric slung with knives, skimmers and tasting spoons. His arrival was quiet but commanding. Talk folded down like a closed book as he crossed to the table. He lifted a ladle to taste the broth, nodded once, and the kitchen sprang wider into motion. Orders went out like measured drumbeats, trenchers to be cut for the household, porridge to be sweetened with honey for the Lord's board, eggs to be boiled soft for the lady's breaking of fast, small beer brought from the buttery for the guards. He inspected herbs, tasting here, sniffing there, his face unreadable but keen. With 2 fingers he cast away a withered sprig, and with a thin smile he set aside a perfect bunch of marjoram for the evening's fish. From the outer rooms came the steady traffic of supply. The pantry boy trundled in cabbages tight as fists, carrots washed in yesterday's meltwater, parsnips, turnips, and a curly heap of kale still wearing the field's frost. From the buttery came small kegs of ale and slimmer casks of wine. From the larder, the breath of winter itself drifted in cold, iron-sweet haunches of venison, sides of boar, and a braided choir of sausages hung to dry. The dairymaid arrived with shallow pans of cream and a jug capped in linen. Last night's milk settled to curds under the hearth's sleepy heat. Knives sang against whetstones, sparks hopping like flea. Breakfast was the kitchen's first hard current. For the servants and guards, trencher slices of coarse rye, steaming bowls of pottage brightened with onion and a nut of butter, soft cheese, mugs of small ale. Houseboys bore the trays away at a trot, weaving past dogs with a practised knee. For the lord and lady, manchet bread white and fine, fresh butter rolled and stamped, soft-boiled eggs in pewter salts, pears stewed with cinnamon in a spoon of wine, thin ham shaved from last month's smoke. The cook himself nested these on a salver, fussing the last fig to a better angle, rasping a crust with sugar to glisten in the firelight before he nodded it away under a page's careful hands. When the morning board was cleared, the kitchen turned to its greater labours. The steward had sent word the hunt would return by noon. At night there would be a feast. That meant carcasses to dress and ovens to keep at a steady, sovereign heat. In the larder the boar hung, bled and stiff. 2 men worked the hide loose, one cutting, one pulling, the thick skin coming away like a door from its hinges. A haunch of venison was rubbed with salt and laid in a trough with wine, vinegar and herbs. A boy pricked holes for the marinade to run and laughed when the cook cuffed him for humming. On the feather-strewn bench the geese came clean under practised hands, soft white drifting down to cling to aprons and lashes. Pin feathers were singed to a sweet stink that rose and vanished in the smoke. One corner belonged to the Bakehouse crew. Their brick ovens, already hot from the long night, breathed gentle dragon's breath. Dough lay in mellowed heaps, its surface blistered with tiny bubbles. The bakers turned and knocked it down, folded and rolled, shaped it into loaves with quick, tender palms. Long peels slipped the shaped bread into the glowing maw. A whisper, a hiss, and the fragrance of baking lifted like prayer. On the bench beside them pies took form. Venison shoulder in a dark, juniper-scented gravy, boar and apple, eel with parsley and wine held in a coffin crust thick enough to travel, sweet apple tarts for the high table, their tops pricked with little hearts. An apprentice brushed each lid with egg yolk, another pinched fluted edges and tucked a sprig of rosemary just so. Across the passage, the pastry and sweetmeats bench ruled its own small kingdom. Almonds were ground to paste with a drizzle of rosewater, pressed through cloth into white milk for custards. Honey warmed with walnuts and a whisper of ginger until it drew a thread from the testing nail. A boy with careful eyes weighed saffron stamens as if they were coins of the realm. Another scraped a nut of mace across a breadboard, releasing a scent that made old scullions sigh. Marchpane figures took shape under nimble fingers, birds, beasts, a tiny castle for the subtlety, painted with plant colours and glossed with sugar water that shone like ice. By midday the kitchen had become a weather of its own, a dry wind of heat from the main hearth, eddies of steam from cauldrons, sudden showers of sparks when a log was set down too hard, a thunder of cleavers, the rain-on-stone hiss of quenching. Knives flashed silver and went dark again. Fish scales shone like coins, then vanished under the blade. Herbs fell like confetti. Onions made boys tear and curse and laugh at one another's red eyes. Dogs pranced along the edges of this world, bold until a broom taught them sense. In the far corner a bellows boy kept the roast's fire to a steady tantrum, his cheeks as red as the coals. The huntsman came in a spatter of mud and triumph, carrying rabbits, pheasants, a brace of hare, and most prized, a red deer taken clean. The cook clapped the master of hounds on the shoulder. The steward counted under his breath. Then the work surged. Hares skinned quick as pulling off a glove, livers saved for the lord's pie, hearts set aside for the kennel master's fee. Birds plucked, drawn, rinsed in salted water. The stone floor turned slick. Scullions scattered ash and sand, then swept a path for the pastry cook to pass unblooded. Hounds elped and were rewarded only with bones too small to keep. Beyond spectacle lay the quiet necessities. Salt barrels were checked and rolled. The dairymaid poured cream into a shallow pan to clabber for cheese. The herb woman arrived from the kitchen garden with baskets of winter gifts, bay leaves, thyme, winter savoury, leeks that had slept under straw, a handful of sorrel daring the cold. She left also a clutch of remedies, comfrey for burns, fennel for the lady's cough, tansy to keep flies at bay when the weather turned, before melting back into chill air. As afternoon waned, the feast assembled itself like an army on the march. In the roasting hearth the boar turned on its iron spit, basted with wine and rosemary by a boy whose lashes were singed to little commas. A rack of venison ribs took on a lacquer of honey and pepper. Geese rotated in ordered ranks, their fat pinging softly in the pan below, saved like gold. Fish for the pious guests were gently poached with leeks, parsley, and slices of bitter orange conjured from the cellarer's secrets. On the back bar, sauces found their gloss, cameline thick with toasted bread and cinnamon for the red meats. Green sauce pounded from parsley, sorrel, and sage brightened with vinegar for fish. A pepper sauce dark as dusk for the boar. The cook tasted each with a bone spoon, eyes half closed, and adjusted as if listening to a choir and finding one voice sharp. Meanwhile, the kitchen met lesser needs without pride but with precision. A tray of light wafers and almond milk climbed to the lady's solar. A plain bowl, well seasoned, went to the chaplain, trencher and stew for the gatewatch, a rice pottage for the lord's elderly aunt who found meat hard to manage. The cook kept tally in his head, tapping his knife against the board when someone tried to claim twice. Between the main hearth and the bake oven stood the scullery kingdom of hot water, sand, ash, and raw knuckles. Scullions sluiced platters, scrubbed pots black to a sullen shine, scoured knives with pumice, and set them to dry in ordered rows. Buckets steamed, benches dripped. Their corner smelled of lye and mist. The head scullion, a woman with arms like braided rope, ruled it with a stare sharper than any blade. The steward's bell rang from the screen's passage. The high table was set. The mood tightened like a drawn bow. Platters took their places on the staging boards, boar with an apple grinning in its jaws, venison carved in fans, whole trout glazed with an eye of oil, pigeons in pastry, cabbages chopped and buttered, carrots glossed with honey, trenchers stacked like coins. The subtlety stood ready, a marchpane castle with banners of candied peel, a peacock roasted and redressed in its own jewel-feathered skin, head lifted proud, gilded beak gleaming. Pages and footmen crowded the door to the great hall, faces bright, fingers itching to be swift and sure. The cook moved along the line like a general, adding a last sprig, reslicing here, tilting there, setting a carving mark to ease the knife. He glanced once to the steward. The steward nodded. The procession began. Dish after dish went forth under the rush of warm air from the hall's fires, music and talk already rising. The door swallowed the gleam of meat and the sheet of sauces. The kitchen stood for a breath in the sudden, ringing quiet left behind. Then the second labour, keeping the tide even. Platters were readied to replace what the hall devoured. Sauces warmed at the edge of the coals, pasties mended where a careless thumb had dented crust. The small staff meal, thick pottage of barley and pork, heel of bread, a mug of ale, was swallowed standing. Laughter flared, quick and nervous, as they guessed which lord would praise, which would complain, who would spill, who would sing. The cook allowed it for a little while and then lifted his chin. The kitchen flowed back to work as if he had tugged a rope. At length the sweet course was called, and with it the hush of hope even among the weary. Custards trembled in their dishes, wafers snapped clean, comfits rattled into silver bowls, marchpane figures went out to be admired and devoured. The cook watched the doorway until the last sugar gleam vanished. Only then did his shoulders ease. After the feast the world returned in pieces, platters with bones, trenchers soaked with gravy, shells, fish spines like combs, pastry coffins gnawed to edges. Waste was sorted with a thrift older than the castle. Bones boiled for tomorrow's stock, fat saved for soap and lamps, bread for the pigs, sound leftovers for the almoner to distribute at the gate come morning. Dogs were given their due, not a scrap more. The floor was sanded and swept, rushes changed where grease had fallen. Buckets of hot water marched to and fro until the stone steamed like a riverbank in summer. Fires sank to a disciplined glow. The chief cook made his last round, knives counted and sheathed. Spices sealed in their boxes and locked in the pantry chest. The tally scratched with iron gall on a board, boar half, venison quarter, oranges 2, saffron weighed, almonds low. He spared a nod for the bellows boy asleep on a sack, cheeks smudged, mouth open like a fledgling's. Beyond the kitchen, the castle softened into sleep-song dwindling, boots thumping off toward chambers, the courtyard settling under stars. In the kitchen, the last pot hissed itself dry and was pulled aside. A single boy remained to tend the banked hearth, to knock ash over the heart of red, to leave one narrow door latch set just so for the dawn scullion's hand. The room smelled of wood ash and cooling bread and a fatigue as sweet as honey. When the first bell of dawn rang across the courtyard again, the kitchen would wake without mercy or fuss. Fires teased back to life, dough knocked down, knives whetted, orders called. This was the unseen covenant of the house. That warmth, labour and cleverness below stairs would rise as splendour above. Here, in smoke and steam, in salt and sweetness, the castle's strength was made daily, one trencher, one laded, one shining platter at a tithe.